Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by former marijuana smuggler. His name's Tim McBride. From 1979 to 1989, Tim ran his smuggling operation in the ocean waters of Florida Everglades. Tim ran his operations with some modern-day pirates. Tim was one of the biggest pot smugglers way back in the day. Tim wrote a whole book about his life experience called Saltwater Cowboy. I highly recommend this book to anyone that enjoys today's story. It'll be in the video description below. Also, please be sure to subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this. And without further ado, let's get into Tim's story. Hey Tim, how you doing, man?
Hey brother, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on, man. I've been looking forward to this for I don't know what, few weeks now or better.
Yeah, man, absolutely, man. I really enjoyed the book. I left a great review, so I'll put a link in the description for your book as well. So if you guys want to hear his story and you want to hear more about it, go ahead, check out his book. But for now we're gonna do an interview with him. So, Tim, what we'll do is we'll start off with your early life, man.
Yeah, okay. And and as we finish up, then we'll get into the book and where you can find it, how you can contact me or follow me and all that kind of stuff. But
Yep.
yeah, my life growing up wasn't in contrast to how it wound up, was really nothing out of the ordinary. Then, it was nothing dysfunctional or anything, with my upbringing and growing up that caused me to become an outlaw, if you will, for the lack of a better way of putting it, because, my generation that was involved in that sort of thing in the Caribbean marijuana smuggling industry during the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're more I guess acceptable to the terminology used as far as being outlaws and not criminals. Criminals, under our estimation, are willing to do anything it takes to get whatever it is they are willing to accomplish done, and that involves hurting people and stepping on and moving, whatever it takes. Well, us being outlaws, we consider ourselves, quite different than that, because first of all, everything we ever did and everything I ever did involved with, as a kid growing up in this industry, only once, my first trip to Colombia, and we'll get into that, did I ever see a gun. I mean, that's just the way it was. There's, families and generational throughout the Caribbean rim where the cannabis was coming from, were family and generational, as we were, that sort of thing. So my growing up, in the earlier years, my father was 82nd Airborne, just nothing irregular. He got a sales job that took us to the Midwest, where I did 4 years of my high school years in southern Wisconsin, in a little town called Delvin, which is next to a resort area, also very quite familiar, called Lake Geneva.
Okay.
And so for 4 years I was there, and I had done I'll just skip over real briefly. I had done a 2-year stint out in LA in Hollywood. I worked for an entertainer that was pretty famous in his time, named Sammy Davis Jr. I'm sure you've heard of him. And Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, of course, Joey Bishop. They were part of what was called a Rat Pack. In those days, doing shows together in Vegas, and, in comedy and variety shows and such. Well, I worked with Sammy Davis Jr. I was hired to do personal videotaping for him. As a kid, I was just 19. I just turned from 18 to 19, and my cousin actually got me the job. He was driving Sammy Davis's tour bus at that time, and different story how he got into that. So he invited me out to stay for a week or so, and I got to be good friends with Richard Wayman, who was Sammy Davis's financial advisor, and the guy that was living in the apartment that Sammy would rented for us in Encino in the Valley, just off of Ventura Boulevard in Balboa. And everything was paid for and that kind of stuff. Well, the Hollywood bubble burst for me, after I figured out, what it was all about, how phony that crap was and shit. And then just people like everybody else that put their pants on like I do. So I went back to Wisconsin, and when I got back there, wasn't there for a couple of days, and my best buddy, lived next door to me, while I was going through high school and stuff. He called me that about 3 days after I got home, and said that he said, "Hey Timmy," he says, "man, I'm moving to Florida, in tomorrow." He says, "We're taking off." And his sister, who I knew really very well, and her husband was actually a native from this little island down here in the 10,000 Islands named Chuckaluski. And he was managing. She and he managed the only fish house on the island. So he was a native, and she was Mark's sister. So they invited him down there to work on one of these fishing boats, these stone crab fishing boats. And he took the job. He says, "Man, I'm leaving tomorrow." He says, "We're going to go down there and do this. And Thorns will build a house. And if you want to help out, do that while you're down there. Come on, you want to go?" I said, "Yeah, hell yeah." So I just packed. Like that. I packed my stuff in my Cobra. I had a Mustang. I had a '76 Mustang, Cobra at that time. I packed everything in that thing that night. And the next day, we were gone.
You're like, wow, that sounds great. Let's just go down there, man.
Yeah.
Life-changing shit,
Yeah.
Just
and that's just how I ran my, I began a bit of a philosophy in my life at that time. And I began to realize that, having done the things I'd done up into that point, that, I had made a pact with myself, and, it took a number of years to get any decently, any monicum of good out of it. And that was that, to never pass up an opportunity or that which appeared to be an opportunity, and later on kick myself in the ass and say, "I wish I'd have done that."
Right.
I just saw it for what it was and just went and did it. So that's how I'm just, I'm flying by the seat of my pants, that's by the story that you read and just the story that your followers and, and listeners are about to hear is just a bit of a Forrest Gump type of a tale. I just tripped over from one thing to the next, man, with really no intentions, of going down there with any aspirations of pothauling. It was just, prior to going there, I heard a couple stories from his sister, and, just overhearing conversation. It really was in one ear and out the other. But after we had taken this 2-day drive and we got there, Highway 29 dead end right on Chuckaluski Island. So it's Everglades City and Chuckaluski Island connected by causeway, and they're both islands. And the combined total of the two islands was just under 500 people. And even today, I think it's just over 400 people. There's not many there.
Small.
Yeah, I mean, they're not making any more of the island, man.
And there's not room.
You can only get so many people on this thing, right? Or between the both of them.
Yeah.
But that being said, that's how I wound up, just very, serendipitously just wound up coming down to Florida on a whim. And I was working, helping to build his brother-in-law and sister's home, their permanent home, because they were, mostly trailers on this island. It's only 129 acres. And most of the homes that are there on stilted homes are from families that were there, generationally, or permanent residents. And a lot of trailers are there that people live in, of course. And you have your fishing community and fishing people that come down. It's a very touristy type of place because the 10,000 Islands and that portion of the Everglades is world famous for its fishing. It's backwater. It's backwater and offshore fishing. So, so that's why I wound up. I started working and building on this house and stuff. And Mark, he goes and gets, he's working on this stone crab boat. And what stone crabs are, they're a big crab. And I'll send you some images.
Okay. Yeah.
That you can
put them up.
You can throw along and put them up, as I go along. But, one bull crab is called this, a male crab had, it would have a claw the size of my hand.
Damn, that big.
Huge, dude. That's what I'm talking. I'm, holding these things like this, and
God.
what we do is, and we harvest them. We throw the traps. And how it was described to me, and the reason and how I wound up, going from working on the house. The house got finished, and there's 3 people that run the boat. Let's begin with that. The captain runs the boat. He's the king of the Kong, man. He directs the show. And there's a first mate and a second mate. We run the stern. We run the boat. We run the everything on deck. And there are 2 on the port starboard, on the port stern and the starboard stern are what we'll call pullers. Mm-hmm. And they're hydraulic shivs. I'm not familiar if most of you or even any of you are familiar with a show called Deadliest Catch.
Yeah, I am. I know.
Where in their case, it's a very similar setup, except for their traps weigh 1,000 pounds and ours only weigh about 50. or
Oh,
60.
okay.
You
Yeah.
know,
Lots more.
they have two giant bags that are floating with a line in between them that they have to throw and catch with a grappling hook and all like this. Well, ours are on, and they're using rope, 3/4 inch rope,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
They could.
5/8 inch rope, because, and they've got 6, 7, 800 feet of this stuff because they're in, 300, 400 fathoms of water. And our depths are, the deepest we go is 60 feet, so we're pulling 80, 85, 90-foot lines because you have to add a little slack for tide,
Right.
so, and that sort of thing. And the shallowest we pull are 45-foot lines, and those are quick days like this. But they're using maybe 100 to 150 traps, 200 traps. We had 6,000.
That's a
And
lot. You get a lot more than
yeah,
that then.
and the traps are I don't remember the exact dimensions. It's been so many years, but they're about 28 inches wide by maybe 26 or so inches tall, and depth wise from back to front they may be 20 inches. So they're a bit rectangular, but they're pretty husky and pretty sturdy.
Right.
Made out of pressure treated lath that's dipped in creosote and diesel to keep the barnacles from kind of growing on them. But the bottom 6 inches of the trap is full of concrete. So when you're fishing in shallower waters, or even any waters whatsoever, and where you pull that trap out, and how it works is, when you have 6,000 traps, we put 600 here, 600 here, 600 here, and we spread them out all over the Gulf, from inshore to offshore, with different lengths of lines on them. And every day we would go to one of these particular lines of 600 traps. That would be 300 going one direction for about 17 to 20 miles for 300 traps, about 30 yards apart.
Damn.
So while I'm pulling my trap, my partner on the other side of the boat is finished with his and pushing his over.
Oh, okay.
And while I'm clearing and doing mine, the boat's running up to the next trap, and he's grabbing it. Now we're using 3/8 inch trap line, nylon trap line, and our buoys are about just a little bit smaller than a soccer ball.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reaching out and grabbing them with what we call a catch pole. And every puller, which what we were termed as, would usually fashion their own. And mine was a 6 foot or so piece of 1x1 pressure treated lath that I had fashioned a shark hook on the end of it, ground off the barb, and fiberglass it, and a nice handle and stuff on it, because this is our tool. Everybody kind of makes their own. And you reach out, and you literally, just as a boat comes up into the buoy, you reach out and grab that buoy and pull that rope in and get it through a block and tackle, and put it around that that thing. Now, when I said deadliest catch, you notice where they put that rope through that big spinning disc? That's called a shiv. And on their operation, obviously, is magnified the size of what they're doing compared to what we're doing. Our shiv, theirs is as big as maybe 3 feet in diameter. Ours are only maybe 14 inches in diameter. They're small because we just, we're dealing with, trap line this big. And what they are basically is, they're shaped like two pie pans, and they're, pressed together. And when the rope goes in between them, it cinches that rope and pulls on it. And down below, rather than allow the line to keep spinning around that thing and, tangling it up, there's a little piece of metal at the bottom. It's called a knife. It doesn't really cut. It's just what it's called. It kicks that rope back out, and the rope just coils up at your feet. So we're going through these, and we're singing. I pull one, and I clear it, and I get ready. And as soon as Mark on the other side pulls one, I push mine off. So we're back and forth. We do that first 17, 18, 20 miles, first 300. And you usually start, at daylight, as soon as you can see that first trap, because there's a lot of work to do, man. That's a lot of traps to get through, depending on the weather. You got all the seas to deal with, and you still got to get through that line, because you can't let it sit.
Traps. That's a lot.
Yeah, you got to get around to 10 different lines, regularly, because if the traps sit for too long, the crabs don't feed, and they feed off their own body, and the meat starts to shrink in the shell. Or you give them it long enough time to start working on that wood, and they'll chew and find a way to get out of there. So you have to be doing this. So that's how it all worked, as far as the fishing part of it.
Right.
So, it's hard work, man. I mean, it'll make a man out of you because these traps are heavy. I mean, they're 50, 60 pounds just because they're full of concrete at the bottom of them. And if the captain doesn't like what he sees coming out of those traps while we're pulling him, he'll open the door of the wheelhouse and yell, "Pick him up, boys." We'll go back to the very first end and we'll start, coiling the ropes and gathering the traps and walking up the deck and stacking them and put all 600 of them on the boat, and he moves them somewhere else and we'll throw them all off 17 miles this way, move over 50 yards or 75 yards and put 17, 20 miles of them back the other direction, and that's a day's work, man. I mean, that's what'll make a man out of you.
Yeah,
so
that's true. That's a fucking workout, man. God damn.
It is. It is. And one of the captain that I was working with, Billy, Captain Billy, is Captain Red in the book is his name.
Yeah.
His father, Hubert, who I mentioned in the book, and I will get to that part about Hubert and us finding those bales that day. He told me, he said one day, he said, "Jimmy, you might last 2 seasons, maybe 3 if you're tough enough," he says. But, most guys don't last much longer than that just because of the type of work that it is, but I think I managed. I think it was like 6 seasons or something. First of all, after a while you get good at what you do. You find ways to cut down. And when you start bright and early in the morning, and 600 traps a day is a big pull. We were one of the bigger operations, and most of the boats were only pulling maybe 450. And they're getting in at 4 and 5, and sometimes after dark, depending on the season stuff. And we had it down and to pre-nailing the boards for repair, and just having all the equipment, everything we needed right there, so we could address any issue or any problem. Because if the crabs have eaten through a board, you got to pull that board off and put a new one on it. You have to clean the barnacle out of the funnel that the crabs have to drop into. You have to first open the damn thing up and get what crabs are in there out of there. And those things are like, I mean, they're huge. Some of these, I mean, like I said, some of these damn things are
Snap
huge,
your arm
man.
off.
Oh, dude, and I've had them get a hold of fingers before. And, I mean, they're just like hydraulics. They just keep pumping and pumping and pumping and pumping it.
How do you get it off?
The only way to do it is, and I had this big bull on my finger, man. I'm screaming, I'm running around the deck, and I just literally had to take him and smash him on the rail and break the claw off. And the claw hung on there for a minute, for about 3 seconds, and then it let go. And I'm like, oh my God, my finger swelled up, it got fish poisoning, and I was really gnarly. But had it been any other the other claw, now most people don't know this, but all crabs have 2 different claws. One is called a cutter claw, which comes together all the way. When it opens up, it comes together like this. This is the one they cut with. Right. The other claw is called a crusher. It comes together like this. There's always a gap in between. So it crushes and holds, and the other one cuts it up. They're always 2 different. Well, if that cutter claw got me, man, it probably would have took the tip of my finger off. No, that's not fair. After a while, you get nipped, you get close. They'll get you on maybe where your skin is, and you have time to pull away before. But if this one got me on the knuckle, and there's no giving. Once it gets you on the knuckle, man, it's got you. But that's just part of the job, and we're flipping them, and we're emptying these traps out as quick as we can. We'll find them, cleaning them up, because the captain, if the weather's good, that boat doesn't have to stop. And a lot of times, depending on the tide and the way the lines are running, you got that buoy, there's no slack. The captain's got to back down on that thing, with this giant, you got a 51-foot boat with a 12 cylinder twin diesel Detroit engine in this thing, and it's got a hydrostatic transmission forward and backwards just as quick as you can pull it. He'll throw that thing in reverse and back down enough to get enough rope. Water's flying and splashing depending on the type of day you're in, and it could be either an easier day or you're going through hell. So that being said, after I finished working on the house, well, Captain Billy, obviously at that time, he was ready to, in hindsight, he was ready to get back in and start working along with, everybody else was working, and bringing loads, and making money. And Captain Billy didn't really like this other guy on the boat that was working with Mark as the second mate, because he didn't know him that well. He was from Michigan, and it was just his first season and stuff like that. So he wanted to get me on board because they knew me and they knew Mark. And we're talking about a town of just under 500 people, and half the town is involved with the story I'm about to impart to you. And when somebody comes into town that doesn't belong there, they know you're there,
Yeah.
And when Mark and I arrived, they already knew us, basically where we came from. That's Mark's brother-in-law is a native. I mean, he's running the show on the island with the fish house and stuff, and that's his sister. And I came with him, so everybody knew we were cool. So there was no question about our backgrounds and anything like that. So what Captain Billy decided and Mark was that they worked this guy. Took him about a week, and they worked this guy so hard that he just said, screw it and quit. Because it can be done, So then they got him. Then they said, come on, bud, we got a spot, Timmy, on board. So that's when that first afternoon they imparted me about how the scenario works. And like I said, when at dawn, when you can first see, that's when you first pull up first buoy and back and forth. And it's not rocket science. It says it'll take you a little while to learn how the hydraulics, because we work our own hydraulics. You pull that buoy up in there, and that ship is already spinning. Once you hook it with that rope, it's pulling the trap, and all you have to do is adjust in the speed. And once it gets up, you start seeing it coming up from the bottom and breaking the surface, and you can slow it down, ease it up to where it's hanging right in front of you, pull it towards you, and back the hydraulics up, and it'll set right on the stern rail with right in front of you, where you can turn the knobs, open the latch, and take the catch out and sort of like that. So they explained the whole thing to me, start sun up, like this. So that first day, or that night actually, and the boat typically leaves anywhere between 3 and 4 or so in the morning, because it's typically a lot of times you got a ways to go before you get to that first line that you're going to work that day, that trap line you're going to work. And I can remember that first day waking up and the sun was already up.
At 3 or 4, damn.
No, at 3 or 4. No, hell no. It was after that, dude. I was out there, and all of a sudden the sun. I said, and I'm thinking to myself, laying in the bunk. I said, no, they told me they started when the sun come up, or just started. And I leaned over and I rolled over and I looked out of the bunk. The bunks were in the wheelhouse, right behind where the captain's, all the electronics in the captain's chair and where he's sitting. And Captain Red, or Billy actually was his name, Captain Red in the book. He looked over at me because he saw me looking at him up, and he had this big grin on his face. And he goes, Timmy, he says, we're not going to pull traps today, buddy. He says, if we're going to hang out here all day, out, and all after, a little bit of this afternoon, just goof around and, just get stoned and swim around a bit, and later on after this evening, we'll unload a pop boat from Columbia. And I said, oh, damn, okay. He just kind of sprung it on me, and it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek affair with my buddy and him, because they knew I'd be cool with it,
Yeah.
But they waited till I got out there to spring it on me, so
yeah.
So
and no turning back.
There's no training manual. There's no book about how you do this stuff. You just go out there and you do what needs to be done. And that's just how it worked. And we went off, and that first night, we approached that boat and got ourselves loaded. It was my first experience. It was 15 tons.
Holy shit.
We put on that boat 30,000 pounds. And it was our job to, as the other crews would, throw the bales overboard, or we would typically, a lot of ways after we started doing this, it would be our job would be for the captain would pull up next to the boat, and we'd throw lines up and tie off and get on the mothership is what they were called, and help the crew get up from down below their deck, below the weather deck, get some of that load up on deck. So, they can start throwing it over to us and then keep up with it, because it's got to come out first. So it wasn't uncommon for us to get on any one of these freighters or shrimp boats or whatever the case may be, help the crew get some of the stuff out of the hole. And then we jump on our boat, and as they throw it over onto ours, and we go stacking it. We put that stuff anywhere we can stick it on this boat. There's no hiding it, typically we'll approach these motherships offshore, anywhere from 2, 3, maybe sometimes 4 hours if we stretch it before sunset. So we have some light to get loaded, because what we're doing and bringing this stuff into shore, that's the next move. Once we've got the load, that boat takes off, we're done with him, and we'll make our way inshore. And the boat's not moving very fast, because you got, 15 tons on this thing, man. It's got like a load of traps on it. So it typically take us, a few hours or 3 hours or so to get in, 4 hours to get in. And by that time, it's 1, 2 in the morning. Now, this stuff has to get in someplace and hidden before the sun comes up. So when we bring it into the islands, the 10,000 islands, we kill our engine. And out of nowhere comes, 20, 25 of these smaller boats, these smaller drafting boats with twin 235 Evinrudes on them. And a lot of them were what we called mullet skiffs, mullet boats. They were bait fishing boats that could run those shallow backwaters between those islands, and the 10,000 islands, actually. And it's a labyrinth of literally 10,000 islands. If you Google it, you'll get an overview look of exactly what Mother Nature built in our backyard, and that's where we played, man. And we knew all the ins and the outs and the turns and the dead ends. And if we got you in there, we'll get you lost, and then we'll have somebody watch and keep an eye on you while we work over here. It was quite literally like that, But that's how it worked. So, we get that brought in, and then after the shore crew, little boats took our stuff in. What they do is they take it and through the passes that we've created, the deep water areas that we know how to get through that are off the beaten path, and literally take it into Chokoloskee Island, the island that we all grew up on, and put the load in one of our buddies' houses that we've literally taken the furniture out of, and stack it in the bathrooms, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the closet. I mean, anywhere you could stick a bale, there was a bale in there, and pull the door shut, after you get it full.
How big were these bales?
Bales are, typically, I'll send you a picture and show you a stack of them. They're probably, I would say, they're rectangular shape. Mm-hmm. They're no thicker than maybe 11 inches thick. Mm-hmm. But they're probably 3.5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide.
Damn.
And this thick, but they're compressed bales, and they're all the same size, and they all weigh between 70 and 80 pounds.
Holy shit.
Yeah, but it didn't start out that way. They didn't start out coming all compressed like that. They came out, what we called originally were pillow bales. And they were quite literally bales that looked like somebody just stuffed a plastic bag with their foot, put some duct tape on it, and stitched it inside some burlap. There was no rhyme or reason to the sizes or any of that kind of stuff. And that was a mess. This was the early days of the, bringing in, Caribbean cannabis into this country. It was those guys on the other end where we're receiving the product from, going through their learning curves as well.
Right.
Because this is the late 70s, early 80s. And the generation prior and 2 generations prior had been doing this since the 60s, so they, and it wasn't until, the early 80s when the advent of the household and commercial trash compactors started making it into the scene, that they, somebody from one of our older generations went, bing, went down there and said, look, here's, I think, what you need to do. So now they all come out the same size, the same weight. I mean, they're all easily handled. Now the loads are getting bigger, because they're easier to handle, and they're more compact. And it didn't take us 3 hours to clean the goddamn boat up when we got done, because, I mean, like I said, when the earlier days, and who knows how many times these things were handled before they were given to us. And our boat, we were literally, when we got it off onto the little boats, some of these things that were coming apart had holes in them. And they're leaking in the buds and the seeds. And I mean, everything's coming out of them. And we get this crap off of our boat, and it's our job to run offshore now. It's at 2, 3 in the morning and clean this boat. And we're literally sweeping weed into piles and taking the ice shovel and scooping it up and throwing it overboard, just to clean the deck of the boat off. And I'll guarantee you, and I will bet you that I had poured more pot out of my boots than any 10 guys could smoke in their life, because of this nasty shit, man. But
oh man.
yeah, and
So
we got tired of that. So one day we went out, and we kind of expected the same scenario, but things just started to get a little bit better. But every now and then you'd get that one load that was still, kind of messed up. But what we had started to do, and this was the Captain Billy's idea, was he had come on board one morning early with 2 rolls of plastic and duct tape, and this was visqueen plastic that you could unroll and open up. And when we got out there and got ready to load the boat, typically what happened if you give the boat a call sign an hour or 2 or 3 before sunset, every boat mothership that's arriving has a particular call sign that they'll answer to. And then the captains and us are the only ones that know that call sign. So we'll call it out over the radio several times and wait for an answer. And once we get that answer, now we can move toward that boat. And we're typically as far away from the mothership as we can be, but still be within reachable distance within 20 minutes or so. And that's the horizon. Horizon is when you go offshore, you see something shrinking in the distance like this, and all of a sudden it will disappear. Once it disappears, that's what's called the horizon on the water. That's your line of sight, your vision. So we usually say just outside that horizon, make this call sign. So we have the time to call from where we are to get to the boat, and we line the inside of our deck of our boat with this plastic over the rails and duct tape it down like a big bowl. And now bring it on, man. Bring that nasty shit on. We got it covered this time. So we would take the load, get it off, and go offshore to clean up. And now it's just pull the tape up, pull that big giant ball of plastic into a big ball in the middle, tie a chain and an anchor to it, and throw it overboard.
Damn.
Problem solved.
Yeah, so then you wouldn't have to sit there and clean for hours and
Yeah.
hours and hours. Shit. So I mean, when you were doing all this, after you'd get to shore, you guys would hide it out, and then at that point, someone would go and meet with the guys that were buying it, or receiving it again, or what was the process at that point?
No, what actually is taking place is that we were what the United States government described as, this thing went on over years, was we were called service providers. We never actually owned this stuff. We didn't want to own it. I mean, we were making enough money, and and you can only have so much money because there's only so much you can do, without becoming stupid and noticeable and, getting ridiculous. And next thing you know, you're that guy in handcuffs.
Yeah.
So we don't want to sell it. We don't want to get involved with that whole. Now you got a whole string of people that you have to wind up trusting. And, the trust that we that we engendered amongst ourselves, came from, being families and being generational in this industry. And when, that's why, the story is such a likable story, in that, it tells the history of cannabis and how it began and how it ended in this country. And these 2 little islands, Everglades City in particular, being the hub of marijuana smuggling in North America at one time. And nobody knew it. I mean, who would have thought that millions of pounds of weed are coming across this tiny little fishing island, little, under 500 people fishing village, and this stuff is going out of there by the 40, 50 tons. So, like a week, in cars and trucks and vans. But once it gets to the house, that night, just like I said, it has to be brought in and put somewhere before the sun comes up, otherwise they heat up, man, So as the houses are getting loaded, sometimes, there's one or, we need 1 or 2 houses because the loads are such, because the very second day I went out to work on the boat, we did the very same thing. I never saw a trap the second day I worked out there. That second night was a 22-ton night that we hauled that night. So skipping back forward again now to the people that are at the house now, While that house is being loaded at night, it takes a lot of cars and drivers and vehicles to get this stuff to Miami. It just isn't going into one big truck and off it goes. Never done like that. On very rare occasions, when the opportunity presented itself to do it safely enough, it went out like that, in big trucks. But in this case, what would happen was be now that the shore crew's taking over, and this is when at times the women get involved, and they're drivers, and the owners of the vehicles would come out to where the house is while it's being loaded that night and get their vehicle loaded, whether it be a van, a truck, a car, or a Bronco or something with the windows blacked out in it or something like that. Right. Anything that you could stick a bale of weed in, we were using. Everybody. That's why half the town was involved in it. Out of under 500 people, half the town was working.
Holy shit.
Because, I mean, if you got 50, 60 people it takes to make one job work, you can't work the same 50 people night after night. I mean, you'll kill them. We're talking about moving anywhere from 800 to 1,000 70 to 80 pound bales of marijuana, sometimes twice a night.
Wow.
And that takes that. And if the stone crabbing doesn't make a man out of you, this certainly will. And you had to do both. You had to do the work during the day to cover what you were doing that night. The boat just can't make money and you not go fishing. So it all had to happen.
Right.
That being said, though, so what the owners would have their vans and cars and trucks, or like I said, whatever filled, and they would drive them back into town at night and park them in the front yard, park them in the driveway and just let them sit there and walk away from it. And the next day, whoever they've hired to be their driver, everybody involved in the job had what we were using 2-meter radios, and they were little handheld radios that had a 5-digit combination that during that period of time was virtually unscannable. There were too many combinations. They weren't sophisticated enough. Right. And we must have had 200 of these radios because everybody that was working had to have one. Mm-hmm. So the drivers had one. The owners of the cars had one. And the owners of the cars are never the person that drove them. And the owners of the boats are never the ones who are driving and actually piloting the vessels. And there's a reason for that. Now, when the daylight comes the next morning, and that's when the stuff starts leaving the island. And the cars are coming up to the house and getting loaded, and off they go. Truck comes up, it gets loaded, off it goes, back and forth all day long. We're using 40, 20, 30 cars, to get this stuff out of here, man. And they're given a direction. They're given directions to some plaza to get to over in Miami, maybe in the Kindle area off of Chrome Avenue. And just go into the plaza, get out of the car and go window shop for a little while. And, when you see your car leave and when you see it come back or whether your vehicle, then you get back in it and, like that. And we were doing what the United States government described as and coined the term as a dead drop, meaning our people would drive, because the drivers weren't the ones that got it loaded in Everglades. The owner did. So the drivers had no idea what house it was in or where it came from or where the entire load was. Mm-hmm. That was a safety valve. Now they drive to this plaza, get out of the vehicle, and we've got one of our people working with the Colombians or the Cubans who actually owned the stuff, pointing and said, well, that's our car, that's our truck, that's our van, like this. And they would get out of it, and their guy would get in it, go unload it at a stash house somewhere and bring it back empty. So our drivers never knew where it went in Miami, and the guys in Miami never knew where it came from in Everglades. So if something happened, no one can say shit. And that was designed that way, as well. Right. And along with all of this goings on in broad daylight, we were masters of hide in plain sight, because who in their right mind would ever figure there's 40 tons of weed coming off of that little island over the next day and a half.
So it was just constant. So you had like your own. I remember in the book you labeled it. Eventually it became an industry, right? That's what you labeled it. So yeah, was this at the point when you labeled it as an industry, or was it got even bigger than what you're talking about?
Well, it wound up getting nearly exponentially bigger. And the reason for that is, as the years go on, there were, it wasn't a, it was a very sophisticated, well-run operation, and it was developed that way over years, like 3 generations. I'm what the United States government and the guys and gals I grew up with are described as 3rd-generation pot haulers, which
Yeah.
which basically means we learn from the fathers and the uncles and the older cousins, who in turn learn from the generation before them, the grandfathers, and and their
Right.
fathers and uncles and people like that. So the story that I impart is, it spans 30 plus years and 3 generations of smuggling marijuana throughout every corner of the Caribbean, wherever it was grown, with quite literally impunity. Because who would have imagined this was taking place in a little town like that? Well,
Right.
no one knew. No one had a clue. Even the government didn't have a clue, and that's why, and it was, it's a very interesting tale in itself, in that it was able to continue for so long, and no one really had a clue what was going on, because no one ever talked about it. It was
Eventually,
all
I
it
was
was
gonna say.
never
Oh, go ahead. Finish.
No, it was purely a trust issue. No one ever spoke of the work that we were doing. If I was out one night and brought a load in, and the guys, jump on the boat, it's not one of those, "Hey, dude, how you doing, man? Hey, it's good to see you." No, it's like, some of the guys have bandanas on. Nobody's talking. It's get that shit off the boat, get it into the house, and do the work. There's no time for bullshit, chatter, and chit chat and shit like that. Some of the guys, you would see bald face, you recognize them and stuff like that, but you never talk. So we're in the club the next night, and everybody's hanging out, having a good time, partying and stuff. That's never spoken of. It never comes in any context, such as, "Dude, remember that last night, man, when that thing," like, no, that that shit never happened. That's just the discipline that took place and that was instilled to us, if we were going to continue to do this,
Yeah,
you
because I
know.
mean, you were making lots and lots of money. I mean, so it's not something you wanted to lose. What was I guess you didn't really go into it on this interview. What was your first paycheck, and then what
Oh
did it
yeah.
eventually come to when you're where you're at with the story now?
Right, right. No, that's a great question. Those first 2 nights, that 30,000 pounds I did that first night I was ever on that boat. From that point on, I had never been involved, and I was 10 years doing this. Did I ever see a load that small after that?
Shit.
They were they were in the 22-ton range, like the following night. Now, for those first 2 nights, I was paid what was described as rookie pay. I was given $5,000 for each night's work, a total of $10,000. And when that got handed, it got pushed across the kitchen table at me, and I'm looking in this bag, and I'm thinking, "Woo, I just struck gold."
Yeah.
I just turned 21, and I just got like 10 grand handed to me. Well, that was rookie pay. Now that the Captain Billy understood, or Captain Clark rather, understands that he has a crew that's willing and able to do this work, I all of a sudden, now I'm getting paid according to the size of the loads that we're bringing in. So my pay now is averaging anywhere from 50 to 75,000 to sometimes $100,000 a night. And I just turned 21 years old. And here's the rub: we're working to sometimes 2 and 3 nights a week.
Yeah. So what did a 21-year-old like yourself spend his money on?
Well, see, that was the thing, and that was part of the trust thing, and I was gonna, it was a great segue into the money thing, with regards to the adults, teaching us how to keep your fucking mouth shut, and you just don't talk about this stuff, that sort of thing, was also their responsibility. They felt that it was theirs to teach us and make us understand, that it's very important to learn how to be able to spend money and not have anything to show for it. So
Right.
you could spend some of your money beyond, to certain limits, but you had to do it in such a way where you don't have anything, no receipts, there's nothing, no way to show for it. You could also, and then even up to today, you can spend up to $10,000 in cash.
Mhm.
$10,000.50. Now whoever you're dealing with is required to fill out what's called a CTR, a cash transaction receipt that's reported to the IRS. Any
Really?
amount over $10,000.
Damn.
So anything that we bought, I bought an $88,000 chase boat that I'll send you a picture of that I used that had three 200 offshore Mercs on it that it would do, it was 33 foot long, and it would do 70 miles an hour before your ass even hit the seat, But I knew the owner of the marina who I bought the boat from, and he knew that I would bring him cash, $9,800 every day until I reached the amount of that, the cost of the boat, because he could deposit that amount as long as it was under 10 grand. So it took me 8 days and I paid for the boat.
8 whole days.
Or I would give, a lot of times what would happen after a while, and it got to be because the same people owned a lot of the dealerships, the Nissan dealerships here in Southwest Florida, owned them all. Actually, there was like 4 of them. Family owned them.
Damn.
I could pull in there and drive out with a truck and just give them a ball of cash, and they knew what to do with it.
Keep it under
Just
10,000.
don't deposit, just don't get ridiculous on the deposits, and that was one way, but we're making the type of money that, spending it in less than $10,000 increments was not getting us anywhere, man. So we started thinking up some really crazy shit. And one thing in particular, I mean, was a really good way of spending money was to, and we learned that, just to go into town to, one of the clubs, there was probably at that time, maybe 4 different clubs that, were pretty popular that, you'd go to this time of night and then you switch to this club and mix like this. We would pick a club and just spend the entire night there and take the tab for the club for the entire night.
Pay for everyone's shit.
Know the owners. I know the owners of the clubs and the guys that are managing, and they knew us, but you know what? They didn't know. I mean, they had an inkling, they had a clue, but it's just like prior to my being involved in this, when you hear these stories, these ghost stories is all they are, and they're not real until you actually find yourself as one of those ghosts like I did. Well, the people in town have that same perception. They don't know. They just got an idea that we're smuggling because we got all this cash and shit. Now we got gold chains on and shit. But if you don't actually see it, you can't actually say that it's taking place.
Right.
So we take over the tabs of the clubs and just pay him cash at the end of the night. And he's not giving me a receipt for that shit,
Yeah.
And we could do the same thing by taking I did a 4-day weekend in Miami with 4 of my buddies and myself. There was 5 of us, and we took each of us about $200,000 each in $100 bills. and it's, it's a stack like this. You can still carry it around a little bit, and just go into a club on South Beach and walk up to the manager, who most of them, like I said, knew who we were, the guys from Everglades, and say it's time to take the tab, and just at the end of the night, or whatever, let us know what it is, and we'll tally it up. And our sole intention, our sole purpose, by taking $1 million between us for 4 days, with the sole intention of coming back home with just enough money for gas.
What the hell? Holy shit. You just be blown.
Just to get rid of it, because, it was coming, when you're working 3 jobs a week, and then you take some time off, then you work another couple and stuff like that. What people have to realize, first of all, is that how it works actually, and in the form of pay. Okay, there's a hierarchy in the pay scale, for one thing. If you're the guys who are going offshore like we were, and that was my first job, as a pot hauler, was going offshore and unloading the motherships. That's the big payday. That's where the most money is made, because now when that load's coming in, if it's too big, there's 2 boats working out there offshore. If it's a good size load, and I've seen freighters out there with as much as 200,000 and 300,000 pounds of Caribbean weed on them, that we would have to go out 2, 3, and 4 nights just to empty the whole boat. So we're using sometimes 2 and 3 of these big boats at any one time to bring this stuff in. And there's only 3 guys on a boat, and each boat could have as much as 40,000 plus pounds on them. 3 guys are responsible for that entire load for about 4 hours or so, or however long it takes to get back in. And that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
So we're getting paid, a lot of money. The next group of guys that come out to take it from us, the smaller boats, they're about $35,000 each. And out of that $35,000, the captain of that boat pays his crew guy on board, because, each of those little 20, 30 boats that come out like flies on a garbage can to start taking it off of us and through the islands to the house has a crewman on board that once they pull up to our boat, he jumps on and they start throwing. I mean, I'm throwing bales on whatever boat's near me, just take it. And they're taking 30 or so of them at a time and haul ass into the house, get them off, and make as many trips as they need to make until our boat's empty and that house is full, or it's got the load in it. Then we can go wash and do our thing. Those guys in the house, or the guys running from the boats to the houses to fill the houses, those bale handlers, are making $5,000 a night each. The guy at the house whose that the ship's going into, he's probably making $150,000, $200,000 just for the use of the house. The next day, the cars, the trucks, and then those drivers averaging about $30,000 each. They're paying their drivers out of that $30,000, And what we have also built into the whole system is our different safety valves, for the lack of a better way of putting it. If we're offshore loaded and we're running maybe 4 knots and this boat is just, because there's no hiding this load when we get it on our boat. It's not going down below deck, and it's all hunky-dory and nobody can see it. Dude, it's stacked everywhere. It's on the bow. It's around the sides of the boat where the window's up to the windows. It's on top of the wheelhouse, stacked up just high enough so the radar can still turn. And it's stacked as high as 12, 13 feet on the deck all the way back. There's if you were to fly over the boat, it would look like a mountain of bales going through the water with radar turning on top of it.
So pretty damn obvious.
That's all you would see. So, that's why it's important for us to work, these nighttime hours, because during the day, this shit's in a van or a car. It's hidden. They're not going to see it.
No.
Plus, like I said, 99 times out of 100, they're waving at the cops or those, whoever's around as they're driving out of town with this stuff, because nobody in their right mind would ever expect this to be going on. And I wrote a chapter in the book where you may recall this, where our crews worked 28 nights in a row. Mm-hmm. And some of the guys would say that it was more nights than that, but I left it at 28 and did just a rough calculation based on the amounts that we were moving, to the tune of 1.6 million pounds in 28 nights went across that little Highland, man. And because we were hauling pot like crazy. And it was during that time we had done a job. One of those jobs was 55 tons. And the only reason we did that much was because we just got bored and decided to just see how big a one we could do, because it wasn't about the money anymore. Everybody was just flush with money. And like I said, the money is after a while is not a driving factor, because it really becomes a pain in the butt, because there's only so much you can do, like I said, without becoming obviously stupid, and getting yourself in a bind. Because if a lot of the older generations ever saw this taking place, then you were done. You just didn't work anymore, because you couldn't be trusted with the type of wealth that you're getting, and the trust factor that's involved with everybody, not going to prison, so
with the
I
money?
had, for kids, that was a lot of money. But we came up with some rather, interesting ways on how to spend it without having anything to show for it. And it was a lot of fun, figuring out these crazy. Hell, go on vacation. I took friends over. I had a house in the Bahamas, and you read the story from It was given to me by a Cuban buddy of mine, Carlito, who was, he got tired of counting money one day, and he's just yelling from the front window. He's looking out the window. He's all coked out.
Yeah.
He's looking out the front window, and he yells back, "Timmy, how much money's left? We've been counting for like 3 days." You know, I'm there to get about $23 million, and we're counting for 3 days. And he got tired of counting, so they all went and got some coke, and now they're all tweaking and they're looking out the windows and shit.
That was a horrible idea.
They're seeing cops everywhere behind the bushes and shit, man. You know what I mean? Just paranoia up the ass. And I'm not getting involved in that. I got money I got to get home, right?
Yeah.
So it gets down to the last little bit of pile there on the kitchen table, and Carlito goes, he says, "How much money you got left out there, Timmy?" And he's like, without looking away from the curtain, he turns his head like this, and I said, I don't know, it looks like, just under 300,000, probably 270, 250, 270. He says, I got this house over on Paradise Island in the Bahamas I've been trying to get rid of. I'm thinking about, moving down and putting a place up down in St. Martin on the north end, on the French end. And he said, "I want to sell that house. Are you interested?" And I said, "How much you want for the thing?" He said, "How much did you say was left on the table out there?" I said it wound up being like $230,000. And he says, "Sold." So I just took the last of the money and shoved it off the table and into his bag, and bought a house just sight unseen, and it wound up being a place. Yeah, dude, it was funny as hell. He just got tired of counting. Okay, you're done counting it. Screw it. Buy the house. Get it over with. So I had a way now whereby I could take friends of mine, six or so of my buddies and their girlfriends, and at that time, getting into the Bahamas, all you needed was a voter's registration card or a birth certificate. You didn't need any kind of passport or anything like that. And customs was virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
And everyone that flew over with me had stacks of money stuck everywhere in their belt waists and their socks, and the women had them tucked in their brasiers. I mean, we were carrying cash. I mean, as much cash as everybody could carry, and take it over to the house. And when you open the front door of this house that I got, it was a 4-bedroom, 3 bathrooms, with a chef kitchen, and it had a really beautiful swimming pool in the back. And when you open the front French doors, you're looking right across the street at the Britannia Tower Casino, and the Paradise Twin Towers casinos were right across the street, and the beach was right on the other side of them. So the house was perfect, man. It was at a great spot. And I would take people over there literally with all this cash and tell them, "Look, let's go into one of the casinos. Just, don't be intimidated or, shy in any way of taking these bundles of cash and just throwing them out there to the guy and let him count them out, stuff it into the money bank under the table, and give you chips. Don't worry about it, because there's pot haulers everywhere. Even in the Bahamas, there's coke guys out there that are just throwing cash on tables, and they're used to it.
Right.
Nobody says anything. It's money to them. They don't care where it's coming from, right?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Play, whatever you like to play, win some, lose some. I don't give a crap, but at the end of the day, you take those now money that's been converted into casino chips back to the window, get cash back. I can claim it as winnings in the casinos as I'm leaving the country."
No,
so it was legit. It was some legit cash. It was negligible, really, in compared to the amount of money I was making, but it was spendable money. It was a little bit better than what I had before. Even the charter business that I was running with my chase boat here in Florida, you don't have to pay state taxes on what's considered a service, and charter's considered a service. So I'd be nice where I'd be sitting there writing, "Okay, Tom, Dick, and Harry from California were scuba diving on this day, and they paid this much." And I'm writing out these charters, and I'm just putting the money in the bank. And like, "Okay, you want to find these people? It's Tom, Dick, and Harry out of San Francisco. I don't know why the fuck they're go find them, you know. One of those things. But you know,
Yeah.
it was just fun to kind of be able to do that sort of thing, and just goofing around and having the freedom to do that. But there's a lot of joviality in how I wrote the story and what we did, because I mean, we're kids, man.
Yeah.
But we were kids doing something very serious,
Yeah.
and would ultimately wound up having serious consequences ultimately. But um, having run that, like I said, we were running those 28 nights or 28 days of pot, and there was every house on the island at one point was full of pot. Quite literally, every house that was on the water had pot stuffed in it. And we were just for days and days and days and days and days running this stuff out of there and taking it to Miami. Now, a common misconception about the way this all works is quite simply that if I bring you a load of, let's just say it's 30,000 pounds, let's pick a number. I can go to Colombia and buy 300,000 or 30,000 pounds of Colombian red, which is what was preferred smoke in those days, for $10 a pound.
$10.
Yeah.
That's it.
$10. And by the time that same 30,000 pounds reaches United States territorial waters, the price is now anywhere between 500 and 750 a pound. So if we leave it at 500 a pound, I just turned $300,000 into $15 million in 8 days, because that's the typical amount of time it takes to get to the Caribbean and around through the gap, which is Cuba and Mexico and the Yucatan, and get over into Southwest Florida. That's about, barring any unforeseen weather events, about 8 days. So I've literally taken this, and Carlito and Leo are two Cuban dudes. Are the only guys I ever knew in Miami or ever wanted to know. I don't want to know anybody. You bring it to me and I'll deal with you. You deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, I don't want to know anybody. So they bring me the money, tell me what they want, because I had a connection inherited to me around the Caribbean, in Jamaica and Venezuela and Colombia and Panama and Central America and Belize and Honduras, and places like that where they were growing some pretty decent stuff, particularly in Jamaica. Jamaica was like that was the
Always
stuff
been
of the
known.
day. That was the stuff of the day right there, man. Those Ethiopian Zion Coptics knew what they were doing, man, when they were growing the ganja. But I could do that, and for $175 a pound, I could go anywhere in the Caribbean and buy you whatever it was you wanted for $10 a pound. And if I can make $15 million in 8 days, 5 of which belong to me for my pay for having done the job. $5 million is usually what I charge, what it would come to. $175 a pound is what I charge to do the whole thing. Go to the country, load it, bring it on, and put it on your doorstep and give it right to you for $175 a pound. And now what happens is, now you owe me $5 million. I've got your load in. I start sending your load to Miami. I'm giving it to you. I now take $5 million worth of that material and go this way into Naples with it and hide it. Stick it somewhere and send all the rest of the load to you. So when you pay me $2.5 million, I give you $2.5 million of your stuff back. You give me the whole $5 million, I give you all $5 million of your stuff back. Because if you lose your shit in Miami, for whatever your reasons are, I can make one phone call and sell this stuff and we get paid.
Yeah. So you still always had that backup then?
We didn't risk our asses to go across the Caribbean for the stuff and not get paid.
Right.
Now, that being said, the typical payday, it's not like I give you your stuff and you pay me. It's a week, 2 weeks go by, sometimes maybe a little bit longer, because my pay comes out of the sale of that load.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to wait. That's why I'm holding on to this pile of weed in lieu of payment. Once you start paying me, you start getting your shit back, because it could be, like I said, 2-3 weeks. And during that 2-3 weeks, I've done 3-4 more jobs. And eventually they start stacking up. And that's just how it got to be. It got to be a madhouse, man. I had boats out here like it was a parking lot, trying to get unloaded. Couldn't get to them fast enough. But that being said, you know, during that run of that 28 nights, we did, like I said, we had done that 55 tons. I made $75,000 that night,
Holy shit.
working just that one load. And I was off for the next several days because we just worked like 3 nights in a row, and I was whooped, man. I mean, that's some bust ass work.
No, I'm sure.
And I happened to just walk over to one of the houses where I knew there was, loading was happening, and just kind of eased over there to see how it was going. And one of the big dogs, the second generation big dogs that was fathers of the kids I grew, one of the fathers of the kids I grew up with, he was running this job. This was his show. And he sees me and he says, "Timmy, come here, man." He says, I want to ask you something. I want to ask you a favor. And I'm thinking, oh no, so he says, he points to this Winnebago and he says, "I'd like you to, if you would, drive that to Miami for me." Now, about 4 days prior to this, on our last day of our last break we had, the same guy, Daryl, handed me and my buddy Jimmy a chainsaw and a wrecking bar, and he pointed to that Winnebago at that time. He pointed to the Winnebago. It was brand new, 40 foot. It had only like 125 miles on it. Most of those miles were driving it from Fort Myers to get it to the island. This thing was like brand spanking. He says, "I want you to go inside with this chainsaw and wrecking bar," and he says, "Tear everything out of that damn thing from the windows down. I want cabinets. I don't want counters. I don't even want, we even took the seats out, the capstan chairs out of this damn thing." He says, "So when you walk up and you look at it, you see the cabinets and the curtains and everything hanging real nice. But if you got up close enough like this, there's nothing there. It's gutted out." So they would take airbags and put it in the springs, inflate those airbags. So when they put 11,500 pounds of bales in this Winnebago, it wasn't going to spark the highway on the way to Miami. It sat nice and staunch, like it should, because of the airbags in the springs. Well, we even took a bale out, like where the driver could, sit down between these things and drive, because we took the captain's chairs out. There was no seats. And so I'm over at this house that day. We do that big job, and I mean, every house is full. We're trying to load this shit. Well, they fill this thing with 11,500 pounds, and Daryl goes, "Timmy." And I went, "Oh God, here we go." Because I always worked offshore, and offshore there's a safety valve designed in what it is we do out there as well, with what we call a chase boat. And I could send you a picture of mine. I think I told you it was a Chris Craft Scorpion that could do 70 miles an hour, where if everything happened, that boat's moving slow. If we're loaded and we're moving in onto shore to get unloaded from the shore crew at night, captain, he's dialed in. He's in the wheelhouse, really. He's doing his thing. He's got the radar at a 50-mile range. He's checking the instruments. He's watching dials and making sure everything's running great. He's in his zone. And if he sees anything get within that 50-mile range and it gets closer, he can shrink that from 50 miles down to 45, down to 40, down to 35, and shrink it down. As that vessel gets closer, we can get a better bead on the direction that it's actually coming. If it looks like it's going to come to that boat, we just get on that go fast boat and take off into the night and let them have it.
Damn.
Because Billy doesn't own the boat, his dad does. Yeah. And when that happens, if that should happen, then we just call the dad and say, "Hey, look, when we know it's actually being boarded, when we know that the jig is up, we would have to just call on our radio to Hubert, and Hubert would just get on the boat, phone immediately and call the law and say, "Hey, I just looked out, took a walk down the dock. My boat's been stolen, man. It's gone." So, and the cars, the vehicles and the trucks and the cars, everything are done the same way. If they get popped or stopped or anything like that, the first thing the driver does goes, "Gig's up." They call the owner, and the owner calls in stolen, and eventually they get it back because they're relieved of any responsibility that thing's been involved in, because, well, it got stolen.
You did have a few close calls though in the book. I mean, what was one of the one that the closest call that you had? Well, I mean, towards the end when everything went down, we'll go out to that one. But I like the one where you were on the boat and the cop, I think he was trying to shoot at you, maybe, or.
Oh yeah. That was but that boat had come in a day early. It had come through some rather beautiful seas in the Southern Caribbean, and it cut some time on the voyage. It actually cut a day off the voyage, and he came early.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets on the radio and he's calling, hey, he's giving call signs, come on, come on, come on. I said, and I told him, dude, you're a day early. You know, my guys aren't even anywhere around. Who knows where the hell they're at? They're probably hung up. They're over probably in Miami in a hotel, full of coke and horse. I don't know where they are. It's tomorrow's the job. That's when they're going to show up. And that's when I know they're going to show up, because they're a crew I grew up with. It's a schedule for tomorrow. There's no way I can come empty your load tonight. Well, then come out and get us off this thing, he's saying, like this, right? And I'm thinking, God damn it. So I get in my chase boat. I get in my boat with my buddy Todd. And, we run offshore and we run toward this boat. And as we get a little bit closer to it, the sun's starting to get a little bit dark. And I'm noticing a light on in the wheelhouse, and this was after having gotten the guys out. We went out and got them off that boat. And I was pissed. And Todd wanted to throw one of the guys off the boat. He was so pissed because, we don't want to go out there to that boat and then have to come out again the next night. I kind of skipped it forward there a little bit, but we got him in. And the next night we're headed back out, because the crew's ready and everything's ready. We just got to get that boat to come in a little bit closer. And then the crew, our onshore crew, can do what they do. Well, we're getting up a little bit close to the boat, and I noticed that light's on. And I asked the captain, I said, dude, did you, leave that light on in the wheelhouse? He said, it could have been on. I mean, it was kind of a little bit daylight still, I could have left it on. He wasn't sure. So when I got up to the boat, what I should have done, and I knew better, but hindsight, what are you going to do after you've already done it? Would have been to circle the boat first before I even approached it. But he never circled it, ever on the backside. I just came from onshore and went on that onshore side and pulled up next to it. Well, I get up next to the boat. My two boys on the bow and the stern are ready to throw the lines up when, three guys with rifles come down over the edge of the boat like this and say, stand fast, the mother effers, just stand fast like this. And I went, oh shit. And I pounded those throttles and off we went, man. And we just took off like we were shot out of a cannon, right? And I turn around and look, and I see muzzle flashes. Because I know they're not necessarily shooting at us. They're trying to hit my motors. They're trying to get me stopped and shit. And so obviously, we lost that one. But I had the captain actually got blamed for it. And losing a load in those days really wasn't a big deal like most people think it would be, because of the math. If I can turn $300,000 into $10 million for you in 8 days, which means you make your $300,000 and $10 million back. If you take that math and go a little bit further and take the $300,000 initial investment and divide it into 9,300,000, which is that total million, you divide that back into $9,700,000, you come up with the number 32. And what that 32 number represents is the number of chances I have to get your next load in. I can lose the first 31 of them. All I have to do is get that 32nd load in, and you've still made money. That's how ridiculous
insane.
it is. That's how sick the math in this thing is. And that's why people always, I get these strange ass comments in the comment sections about, yeah, right, yeah, bullshit, like this, and cartels. And well, we never dealt with cartels. Cartels were something else. We dealt with families. We've dealt with families who were growers, not the cocaine, Cali, not the Medellin, not those dickweeds, because that was a whole different group of people. We didn't want to get involved in that, But the weed industry and one of my ultimately wound up being a really good friend of mine, gentleman by the name of George Young. Mm-hmm. You may be familiar with him through the movie Blow that Johnny Depp portrayed his character. Yep. And George was always fond of saying that the cocaine business is done with a gun, and the marijuana business is done with a handshake. That's pretty much for the most part true, because at the level at which we were working, violence didn't exist, and it didn't exist because of those numbers that I explained to you. There's just too much money to be made. And if I had ever lost a load, which I never did, it would be just like, go back and get another one, because they still made money. I mean, still got money,
Right.
just that stupid. And I said, and I'm fond of saying, I never lost a load that I didn't give them. And this is a little bit of a funny scenario by the way we worked. Sometimes if things were, seemed a little bit peculiar in either Naples or the surrounding area with regards to law enforcement, there's a lot of patrols out and this and that or whatever. I could spend, $170,000 of my own money and buy 17,000 or $200,000 of my own cash and buy 20,000 pounds of weed. Typically, it was about 15,000 or 17,000 pounds, and it cost me 170,000, 150,000. And I put it on an old rickety boat that had no registration for it, send it adrift off of Naples, which is about 25, 30 miles north of us, and have one of my guys in Naples or Marco Island call the cops and say, hey, there's a boat out here with no lights on, and there seems to be boats running around out here, and I can't see what's going on. Well, they'll go out there and investigate. Score! They just found a boat with 17,000 pounds on it, and they're out there, and that's where all the attention is being paid, while I'm moving 4 times that down here in Everglades, 40 miles away, just keeping them busy up there, because it only cost me. It cost me $1,770,000, dude. I just made 2.5 mil. What do I care?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, so you definitely had it mapped out on, how you would go and do these things.
Right.
So you eventually became like the boss, right? The kind of the captain of
Yeah,
the boat, right?
and how that came about was, and I'm glad you're really very good. When I had that, I was put in front of that Winnebago that we ditched out. Daryl asked me, would I drive that to Miami for him? And I went, what? I just made 75 grand. I work offshore. I had just the greatest respect for any of the guys and the gals that were working, driving this shit to Miami, because their balls are hanging out there on that road, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a 120-mile trip one way to get to this plaza, and you just all day, you'd make as many trips as you can to the plaza and back until the load's done. But what they had also built in by way of a safety valve was that at any one time, there were anywhere from 10 to 12, what we call spotter drivers. These are guys and gals that were paid $10,000 a day to simply run from Everglades to that plaza and back and forth. And now they're all staggered in all different directions, all going this way, some going this way, some going that way. So you're never alone on the road. If anything should happen, if you should get pulled over, the first thing you do is say, hey, I'm getting pulled over, so they can call the owner of whatever truck or bar, car, or whatever it is you're driving, and get that taken care of. And you're always instructed to wait until whoever stopped you gets out of their vehicle and gets between yours and theirs, and then you throw yours, which is now 1,000 to 2,000 pounds heavier than what it normally would be, and you throw it reverse and you ram the holy shit out of the front end of that vehicle behind you, and then you throw it in drive and take off, because he's not going anywhere. You just mangled his radiator and his fan blade and everything up front, but you can't outrun the radio. And it didn't matter. All you needed to do was get out of sight of that guy, and one of the spotters would already know where to pick you up, and you just leave it sit in the road, get out of it, get into a spotter vehicle, and go home. Let them have the shit. They do whatever they need to do with it. The owner's already reported it. Eventually, he'll get it back. So that's, so here I am, Timmy, take this thing. And now I'm the guy that has to sit down between these bales with no seat, and I said, because of who he was, I agreed. Yeah. Okay. And he said, I'll give you $35,000 if you do it too. I said, okay, whatever. So I made the 120-mile trip across to Miami. But the thing of it was that he said he needed somebody he could trust, simply because this behemoth that had 11,500 pounds of weed in it couldn't go to any of the plazas or dead drops positions that were available to us and what we were using at that time, because Jesus, if you pull into a parking lot and you got within 20, 30 feet of this thing, you could smell it, right? So,
Yeah, sure.
it's not going to any plazas. So it had to go right to the stash house. And the stash house was one place nobody had ever gone to. None of the crew, none of the hundreds of people that were working out of Everglades as kids, and even, some of the older people had ever been to this house or met these people. Only the brothers, the Daniels brothers, my buddies' dads and uncles, who were running most of the doing most of the deals at that time.
Right.
Only they knew these people. But I drove this thing over there, and I got down into into the East Miami on Chrome Avenue, past a little town called Kendall, almost to where a town called Homestead, and turned into an orange grove. And I was being directed by radio. And I pulled off and I drove a couple miles into this orange grove, and this clearing opened up, and there's this house that, I swear to God, it didn't belong there, not at all, because it was some cocaine cowboy's dream of a, Scarface gaudy type of home. Only this thing was built like a medieval castle. It had the spires on the corner of the houses, the house, and it had this and this shit. It looked just like a castle. I'm thinking, this guy's a fool. So they put all the stuff. They immediately start loading the stuff and showing it under the house and shit. And I go inside. Now, I was told by Daryl I was asked to spend the whole day there, because when the load stopped coming for that evening, I could drive a car with money back to him, and that would be the end of my day. This was the trust thing going on here. So, long story short, my having spent that day there and getting to know the guys that were, the other end, the guys actually owning the material and purchasing it from, our older generation, who nobody ever saw but them and me. This is the serendipity part. Along comes Operation Everglades 1, they called it, several months later. Now, this was an operation that involved over 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement from across the North America, descended on this little town and started to effect arrests. Well, the thing about the first operation was that the first and second generations had such intelligence that they knew 2 weeks before the operation took place that they were coming, because they had senators and congressmen and judges, and they had them on the payroll, man. I mean, these people weren't stupid. This is the earlier generations, before us kids. Well, it was totally a flop. They were, it didn't achieve the objective that they hoped that it would achieve. So almost a year to the day, here they came again in 1984. And this time is when all the adults, they knew the shit was going to happen. That's when they said, well, these guys aren't going to give up. So they just sat there and kicked back on the front porch and smoked cigarettes till 2 a.m, waiting for the show to start. And, sure as shit, here they came. And this time around, it was reported, Life magazine was one of the reporting magazines at that time that was in on this operation. In their 18-page centerfold article, which was unprecedented for Life magazine even today, to have an 18-page centerfold of your story. And the centerfold was an overview of the 10,000 islands, the labyrinth, which Mother Nature saw fit to build in our backyard for us kids to play in. And the headlines in big letters on top said, "Trouble in Everglades City." And then a subtitle underneath of it said, a Southwest Florida town, tarred with drug smuggling, and most of its 500 residents say, "So what?" And from there, the article goes on for 18 pages talking about a town of mostly women and children and young men, because most of the entire adult population has gone to prison.
Holy shit.
Talking about it being a Keystone Cop affair, a big clusterfuck. There were more reporters than there were people being arrested. and it was on the ABC, NBC, CBS nightly news. I mean, it was across the country. This was big news, man. This shit was going on. And so they take the visible guys, the older generations, at that time, like the brothers, the Daniels, Daryl, the guy that set me over in the van, and that these guys are going through now the judicial system. And a couple of months go by, and I get a knock on my door. I'm living in a little town just outside of Naples, between Everglades and Naples and Golden Gate. And I get a knock on my door one day, and there's this guy, George, I met from that house that I went to, that stash house in Miami. They didn't really know me. They knew my name. They call me Timmy. And, everybody's fond of calling me Timmy, which I don't care. I mean, that's cool. It's a bit of a term of endearment. Is how I perceive it. But nevertheless, it took them, almost a month to find Timmy in this face. People up then, and people are like, yeah, oh yeah, I know the guy. Yeah. So they found me, and there is George. I open the door, and there's George. Timmy goes, hey, buddy, what are you doing? How you doing? He's got this heavy Cuban accent. He says, you know what, brother? He says, we got work backing up and, lots of work to do. Can you do this? Because I'm the only one they ever talked to other than the older guys. They didn't know anybody else. And I just blurted out, oh, hell yeah. Because I was thinking, what was going through my mind at that time was, well, the infrastructure is still there.
Right.
The law enforcement didn't know that the kids were doing the work. I mean, we were the workhorse of the entire mechanism. I mean, you think the adults are out there handling 800 and 1,080-pound bales twice a night, sometimes three? Hell no. Kids are doing that shit, man.
Right.
So what I didn't know was the mechanics of it. Up and until we got involved. Where do you buy it? How much do you pay for it? Who do you go see? I mean, there was a lot to that end of it that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
And I wound up having to understand it. But it wasn't rocket science. It was, if you understand the basics of business, it works like a business.
Right.
You charge a certain price for a certain fee, for a certain service, and this is what you get. I was already knew how the service part of it worked. I just didn't know what to charge and who to go see, and this and those connections around the Caribbean then were handed and passed down to me through several of the older generations, not necessarily in Everglades, but there were 5 other crews working at that time that were working with us to help move our material. There was the Goodland Island, there was Marco Island, there was Naples, and there was Pine Island, all up the entire southwest coast of Florida. There were hundreds of people working when we could work them, because we couldn't do all the work ourselves. We had to get I had 5 crews working at one time. There was so much stuff going on, but when it all boiled down to it, and George said, hey, can you do this? That's when I went back down to Everglades and I got the crew back together. I said, hey man, you guys want to work? You ready to rock and roll? And we just changed and tweaked the way we did things a little bit differently now that we're kids and we're in control. The adults were always still using some of the older methods. Some of the older boats they were using were the mullet skiffs and the well boats and the bait boats and things like that. We were now using a very popular boat called a T-craft, which is a wide, shallow drafting, flat bottom boat that's center console that has a lot of deck space, and you can hang twin 235 Evinrudes on the back of them and give them some decent horsepower. And they also had vertical and horizontal trim, so you could not only just do this and tilt your motors up, your props out of the water, you could raise them up and down on a hydraulic like this. So if that prop, you bring it right up to the bottom of the boat, if that prop will go through the water, the boat's going to go through the water. So we were shallow drafting boats. Plus a couple of brothers, the Morgan brothers out of Naples, were custom building boats that we were designing for just that particular thing. And because of the number of crews that were working in Southwest Florida at that time and using the same types of boats, the vast majority of them needed to stay hidden, because you just can't have these boats, everywhere. Because we're talking about, there were probably 200-300 of these types of boats in
Oh,
Southwest Florida at that time, because they were the workhorse, and what we did also was because, we were trying to shrink the anybody's knowledge of who might be of the hierarchy of what's taking place and the job that they're working for. Because when I was a kid growing up and getting paid those paper bags slidden across the kitchen table, I didn't care who the hell was paying me. I didn't give a shit who the boss was. As long as that bag got slid across the table at me, man, I was
yeah,
cool. And
I'm
that was the
sure.
same with a lot of other people. Nobody really knew that it was me that was going to Colombia, that was buying the shit, that was weighing the shit. I was going to Jamaica, I was going to Central America. I worked for Noriega 3 different times and made him some money, the president of Panama, and things like that, which is another story that maybe we can get in at another time. But um, once I had this all understood and where to go and what to charge and how to do it, it was just a matter of the first load that I did, for Carlito and Leo, my Cuban partners in Miami that I was working with. They wanted me to go to Colombia myself,
Mm-hmm.
pick it out, make sure it was quality product, buy the amount that they wanted to buy, go get it, bring it back, and put it on their doorstep. And I said, okay, I can do that for you. No problem. We wound up investing together on a I think it was just in that time they weren't really all that expensive. Just under $1 million. We bought a 3-year-old corporate Learjet that held that 12-passenger jet. And I could literally get from early morning. It was a 5-hour flight. I could get from Miami to Colombia in 5 hours and spend the day picking out and testing and smoking and doing whatever I need to do to get the amount I'm there to get on a jet, fly home, then send a boat to go get it.
Damn.
And I had gotten to a point where, there was that situation that involved my girlfriend in the book, the story about her in the book, which she made a big mistake by putting not trusting me and thinking I'm out, when I'm out working and hauling and risking my ass, she thinks I'm out screwing around with some whore or some bitch or some shit like that. She puts a voice activated tape recorder under the seat of my 300ZX. And I was in Miami that day prior with one of my Cuban partners talking business, and that recorder was picking up what we were saying. And the next morning she was reading this L. Ron Hubbard Scientology crap, and she got this mystical kind of a fucking bullshit thing going on, and she had said something and repeated to me verbatim something that I had talked to my Cuban partner yesterday about when we were alone in that car. And immediately, as soon as that came out of her pie hole, dude, I got out, I went out the front door, down the elevator and into the car. And I'm looking around, I look under the driver's seat, and there's that freaking voice activated tape recorder that had everything we were saying on it. Oh man. Oh, I come unglued. I came unglued. I went upstairs and I put that thing right in her face, just like this, and I smashed the shit out of it like that. And I said, "You have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea how close you came to getting me killed, getting you killed, getting your mom and dad killed, and getting the dogs and the cats all killed at the same time." You don't do shit like this. So
Hell
everything
no.
I ever did from that point on was always kept secret. I said, from now on, if you enjoy the money that you're enjoying and the lifestyle that I'm providing for you, then you just keep your goddamn mouth shut. Don't ask me about my business ever. And if I don't come home one night, I don't come home. If I, have shit to do, I got shit to do. Don't ask me any questions. So I'm now flying to Colombia, doing and making these orders 2-3 times a month, flying back and being, back in Miami and back to Naples and sitting across the bar from her because she's the bartender at that time by 9 o'clock in the evening, and she had never known I'd left the country.
Damn.
And
Just
that's
like
how
that.
that's just how the business, how a business was taken care of. But
Yeah.
it was quite an interesting ride, man. At
How how long were you the leader? Because I mean, Operation Everglades, the first one happened, and then the second one is when all the shit went down. So how many years was it in between that time?
It was just months. It
Just
was like,
months. Okay.
it was 1984, July of 1984. Um, George approached me about June, July, August, September, October, around October
Mm-hmm.
of that same year. They
Damn.
came searching for me to find me, and that's when we started getting back together. So there really wasn't a huge hiccup in the operation. It was several months, and we got back on track. And that's when I made my first trip to Colombia and met the guy that I called the boss. And you read that story. I'm sure you read that story. It's a hilarious story.
Yeah, it is.
uh, uh, I'm sorry, but y'all that are listening will have to, buy the book to read the story. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in there,
Yeah.
man.
No, you're
Um,
right.
Only because I was in it for so long, as a kid growing up, and I saw the industry evolve over the course of those years, from the bales that were falling apart and coming all the pieces we called pillow bales,
Mm-hmm.
to now them being compacted and pressed and easily movable at that, and less risk, which also meant the loads got bigger and the loads got heavier because now they're compacting and they've got it figured out. So that's how the payday started getting bigger. So when it came time for me to, go ahead and just, jump in, and, I didn't aspire to do this. It just kind of fell into place. And I thought, well, hell, why not? It's just another thing. I wound up being the guy flying to Jamaica, flying to Colombia, flying to Central America. And Jamaica was always fun.
Oh, I'm
You
sure.
know, I could tell you about, and some of the best stuff coming out of Jamaica during those days. And there was a group of guys operating at that time called, they were the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And one of their premier dudes in the church was a guy by the name of, they called him Brother Love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they wound up coming over into here to Miami and buying a mansion on an island out in the middle of Biscayne Bay. Only had like 9 mansions on it, and they bought one. The church bought one of them. And it's right, Star Island, it's called. It's right in the middle of Biscayne Bay. There's about a half a mile causeway that goes out to it. The only way you can get to it, a half-mile causeway built coming back off of it. And they set up in one of the mansions like this under the guise of, freedom of religion. So our religion is, Ethiopian Coptic, and we smoke ganja as part of our religion. So if you join our religion, according to freedom of religion under our constitution, you can smoke marijuana. Well,
Yeah.
government wasn't having any part of that, man. They're like, I don't think so. It's not going to work like that. So, we moved a lot of material there for them crazy guys, and Brother Love was he was a card, man. He just didn't care. He was subpoenaed at his front gate of the mansion one day, and there was news cameras, and anybody in the news was following this little guy in a white shirt and a black tie with a subpoena. And Brother Love and two of his buddies come out to the gate, and the guy puts the subpoena through the gate, and Love grabs it and hands it to the guy behind him so he can look at it. And then he looks at it and hands it back to Love. While this guy outside the fence at the gates telling him about the subpoena and this and that and other shit like that. Well, Love is out there and he's got no shirt, got no shoes on. He's got these ragged cut off jean looking things on and a pouch, a string and a pouch hanging from his waist. And while this guy's me giving him the legal crap, Love's got this subpoena. He kind of curls a little bit and reaches down into his pouch and grabs a handful of ganja, and he's doing like this with it. He puts it in that paper, that subpoena, and rolls it up nice and tight like that and started smoking it.
Oh
Right
my
there in front of
God.
the guy on camera, man. It was a little
Gee,
hilarious. You can probably find that clip on YouTube because
dude.
it's a popular clip, and it's really rather funny. But
I'll have to look that up.
we moved millions of pounds of Jamaican ganja for the Ethiopian Zions, and we brought it right to Star Island, and they were getting it off the island on that causeway. They were using their church bus. I mean, they took the seats out of it, of course, but they were filling it with shit like we did that Winnebago and driving it off the island, that one causeway, But, that's just one of many crazy ass things that were going on at that time, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
When did it all come to an end?
Um, that was about 1987-ish or something like that. What had happened was we had been operating, like I said, for generations with absolute impunity throughout these southern waters in the Caribbean. Um, because I mean, nobody really had a clue. I mean, when even with the first two operations having taken place, it was still very difficult for the United States government to comprehend or even grasp the significance of what it was we were doing and the impact that we were having on with marijuana in North America. And so when the focus came off of them and everybody went to prison, and now I'm kind of running the show with a couple other guys are doing jobs too. I mean, I'm not saying that we were the only pot haulers that ever hauled pot. I would never say that. I would never take away from anybody that had ever tried or um, um, attributed it to the movement as such as in such a way. More power to you, man. I'm glad. I'm proud of you. All I'm trying to say by way of imparting this story is how a small town who was being given shit by the United States government when they expanded and tried to expand the boundaries of the Everglades National Park to impede our fishing and our livelihood, did the older generation say, okay, you're going to screw with us and we're going to supplement our income. So hang on, brother, here it comes. And that's when it all started, and then us kids having taken over and getting a little more sophisticated in the way we ran things and the way we did things. It made it very difficult for someone to infiltrate or even get in there because we've been doing this for so long. So what wound up happening was one of our crewmen who ran what was called a chase boat, like I described the boat that I had running alongside our loaded boat that we could use as an escape.
Right.
He had a boat of his own. He was one of the local guys that grew up in Everglades, one of the original, families, founding families of Everglades and shit like that. Was doing some crazy shit in Colombia with cocaine, got caught, busted, thrown in Colombian prison, and he was there for nobody knew it. And this is the time of the year when the loads, it's a changeover in harvest season in South America, and the loads are, we're not coming as frequently. So the guys could go off and do whatever they want. When they're not working, I don't give a shit what you're doing, man. Guys were doing a lot of different things on their own, and he was making a play in Colombia and got screwed up and got thrown in prison. Well, the United States government knew who he was, and knew that he was in some way part of our crew, our vast network. Went down there and made a deal and said, look, we'll get you out of this hellhole. You come back and this is what we need you to do for us. And that's how it began. They got him out of prison and brought him back and put him right back to work with us. And he was actually the chase boat driver for one of the last loads that I was involved in doing, because that's when the government jumped in. I had 57,000 pounds coming in, and I was splitting the load between my Everglades City crew and the Pine Island crew. I didn't necessarily know the Pine Island crew all that well, so I chose to go up and just keep an eye on and just follow these guys and see how they're doing, see how they're working, because I knew the guys in Everglades knew exactly what they were doing. I grew up with these guys. They know what to do. So here, while I'm setting this job up and doing all this footwork and going to the Keys and finding the boats to work offshore to unload, to be the motherships and things like this, and in advance paying crews and paying people to to have them ready to work that night. Now, if you've got a job coming in at like 57,000 pounds, I'm going to ask for about $20,000 up front. You're not going to get back whether the job goes on or not, because that's money I need to hold boats in place and hold crew and hold people for your night of work. This guarantees here's $2,000, here's $5,000, you're going to work. I need you. And this is money to instill that you're going to get my crew, and my crew is going to be there on time. And whether the job works or not, you're not getting the money back because it's spent money.
Right.
So the job begins, and the boat comes in, and the Everglades are doing their thing, and the guys are doing their thing, and the radios chatter on the radio, and we're at a place out on Pine Island. And I know the geography doesn't mean anything to anybody unless you look it up. Pine Island is just a long barrier island. whereby you can come through what's called the Boca Grande Pass and back onto the mainland. And the guys who lived up there knew of a spot way back off in the middle of BFE that had an old driveway grown up with weeds and stuff that went back to an old dock that was like kind of falling apart and shit that nobody but anybody locals really knew about. Well, they backed a box truck back up in there and next to the dock, and then all of a sudden here come the boats start showing up and the offloaders are offloading, and then they take off to go get more, and they're offloading. We're throwing these bales in this box truck, and we get about 150 pieces or so in there, and all of a sudden the boat stops showing up, and the chatter on the radio stops, and nobody's talking. And a couple seconds later, my spotter that was out by the road, because we had driven back through the woods a little bit to get to this dock. He couldn't see us from the road. And he said, Timmy, man, he said, a car just pulled up in here with its lights on and then backed out and went, back the same way it came. And I'm thinking, no, something ain't right, man. No. We're out in the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't be anybody out here, So I go walking out front, and I went to ask the guy, and he's telling me again, what just took place. And as he's, imparting this to me again, I look behind me, and everybody that was back there at the dock, in that truck was standing right behind me now, because they knew something was going on, something wasn't right. And they weren't going to be standing way back there when, so as we're standing there talking now, if you ran this way, there was a pine forest that you could just take off through and run through the trees and then gone. You run this way, there's about 5 acres of what's called palmetto brush, and that's only maybe 4 feet tall. Doesn't get any higher than that. There's like 5 acres of this shit, so if you're going to run, you're going to run toward the trees. Well, right. I'm standing there and, and we're just, looking around at one another going, what do you think's going on? You could hear what sounded like 20 cars, the tire noise coming down this back road out of nowhere, and they were calling ass, dude. And when I could first see the headlights out in the street for those first several cars that were leading the pack, that's when everybody went like cockroaches with a light on. Everybody started running, man. And everybody, now it wasn't uncommon for when these boats come in from whatever country they're coming from to have, illegals come with them. This Colombian guy came on the boat, and he just once he got off the boat, he took off. I mean, he was off on his own. He got his ride. Well, right. When I saw the lights and everybody took off running, me like a dumbass, which way do I go? I go this way where the palmettos are. And so does this Colombian guy. He's running too, and he's crunch, because these are like dry crunching leaves, and they're accumulating and shit. And I don't get, now I see the headlight of the car, and the road is, the road isn't, 40 feet in front of me. And all I could do at that moment in time was duck down. And dude, and with the driveway that they pulled into, that we had all pulled into, I'm looking over here, and it's only 20 feet away from me. I mean, I'm right there. I didn't get very far at all, man.
No.
No. And here it's like 5 a.m, and it's going to be late pretty soon. And all I could hear was once these screech and come to a stop, and the guys are opening doors, and I'm hearing all these agents yelling, "There's guys running over there. There's some over there. Let's go get them." And the cars are taking off. It was mayhem, and the Bronco that I had seen that pulled in, I'm looking down under the branches, the bushes, and I can see this guy's feet. When he opened the door of his Bronco and the interior light went on, I could see his feet, and I could see him step out onto the ground. That's how close I was to this guy. And somebody yelled something. He got back in his Bronco, backed out, and took off down the road. And then during that time, I heard another car pull up out in the road out in front, and the engine was running. Well, a couple of minutes later, here comes the guy in the Bronco again, and I'm watching his feet, and he opens the door and gets out and shuts the door. And I hear a voice from the car in the street yelling, "What are you doing?" And the guy in the Bronco yells back, he says, "I'm going to go walk back in there and see what we got." And the guy in the car yells, "Well, hang on, I'll go back with you." And I'm thinking, whoa, this is my chance, man. But they go back and they're walking. I give them about 2-3 minutes to get back into the woods, but the car is still running out in the street. And I don't know if there's another cop or whoever's in, maybe sitting out there. And it's light enough where if you were standing where the cop was now in the Bronco, you would see me because I'm right there, man. You can spit on me. I'm sitting because I'm here and I'm watching. And I thought, you know what? I got no choice. I've got to look. And then if I do look, one of two things is going to happen. He's either going to tackle me and or shoot me, or I'm going to bull his ass over, knock him the fuck out, and run like my ass was on fire, right?
Yeah.
So I just peeked up and I looked over and it was empty. There was nobody in the car. And I just like a lightning bolt, I took off. I went across the road, through the ditch and into the woods, and I ran till I couldn't breathe anymore, man. Dove under a pile of bushes and brush and covered myself up with leaves and sticks and all this kind of shit, sitting there waiting for whoever may be chasing me to come running by or whatever like that. But turned out nobody was chasing me. Nobody saw me.
Huh.
And I laid there all day after being up all night, and I'm listening to the helicopters flying around. And I'm listening to all this goings on this mile or so away, and they're towing my box truck out of the woods, and you can hear the branches bang, bang, bang on the side of this truck, right?
Yeah.
So all day I hear this going on, and it got to be late afternoon, and it's getting a little bit dim out, and I was so exhausted because I'd been up like since the day before,
Right.
and I closed my eyes and I'm laying there. And I hear this leaves crunching and branch snapping right next to my head, about 2-3 feet away. And I just, my face was covered with branches and leaves. So, man, I had myself all tucked in there really nice. And I opened my eyes and I looked over like this. And there was a bobcat sneaking up on me. And this damn thing, I mean, it weighed 80 pounds. If it weighed a pound, it was a big bat. It was a big fucking cat, man. And it was doing one of these,
Yeah, creeping up,
sneaking up on me like this because it saw the movement of my eyes, but it couldn't quite figure out what the fuck it was looking at. And then I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh my God, I just spent the day and the night running from the law, trying not to get caught, only to get eaten by this goddamn thing, right? And I had just had it by that time, so all I could think of doing was just take, and just sit up as quick as I could, and throw those leaves and branches and everything like that. And I scared the shit out of this thing. And he jumped in the air. He did probably 3 flips and he hit the ground and took off into the bushes like he was shot out of a cannon. He scared the crap out of him.
Holy shit.
And now it's dark and I make my way up, back out to the road and I stayed, in the trees and off the road. And I walked about 3-4 miles down the road to this fish house. Pine Island Fish House was open. And the lights were on. And this is like 2:30 in the morning, and there's lights on, and there's people still in the fish house, and this is obviously before cell phones. There's a telephone booth in the parking lot, right in the middle of the parking lot, but all the lights in the parking lot are on. They're on.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, how in the hell, I'm picking crap off me. I'm thinking to myself, how in the hell am I going to get down there and get on that phone and no one be any way suspicious about me being out of nowhere on a phone in an empty parking lot at 2 a.m. I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to pull this off? Well, the reason why the fish house was still open and lights were on inside is just not 30 seconds later, 2 shrimp boats just pulled in and docked, and they docked to unload their catch. And that's why the guys were still at the fish house waiting for this catch to come in.
Right.
Well, took them only about 45 minutes to get the catches unloaded, and now the crews are lining up at this phone booth to call for their rides home. I just eased my way down nonchalantly and got in line with the rest of the guys. And when it got my turn, man, I got to the phone book and I'm looking, I get the T's and taxi, and I call the first one. I didn't even look at any of them. I call the first one that said taxi in front of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to this guy and I telling him where I'm at. And I said, look, dude, I just need you to show up. I've been fishing for 3 days. I'm tired. I want to go home. I want to, take me in a Punta Gorda. I want to get a hotel room and just, get a shower and sleep for a day. Cause, I'm tired. He said, I'm pretty good ways away from you, man. I said, did you bother look at the address? I says, no. I said, I just need to ride. And I said, if you're willing to come get me, he said, I'll put $600 in your lap cash, and then I'll pay your fare for wherever it is you take me in Punta Gorda. He said, really? No shit. I said, yeah, absolutely. So, as I'm talking to him, there's like 4 guys still behind me. This sheriff's deputy drives in the parking lot. He goes right in front of me. And he goes over around me, and he goes behind me, and makes a big circle all the way around, and he goes out another entrance over here. He goes back down the road. And I'm thinking, holy shit. I said, dude, come on, get over here quick. I'm tired, man. I gotta go. So I hung the phone up. It was about 40 minutes it took him to get there. He showed up. I threw $600 bills in his lap, and I flew in the back seat, and I slumped out like this, and I said, let's go. He took me to a hotel, and nothing really came of it until about a week or so later. That's when the investigation started, and people started showing up at my house, and like that, asking questions and shit. And that's that was pretty much the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what wound up happening was the front page of the local Naples Daily News. It made the headlines, and I'll also send you a copy of that.
Okay.
Where in bold letters across the top of the page, 3-inch letters, it says area part of U.S. pot dragnet. And the centerfold, the center subtitled article said, agents say 38 helped import over 150 tons with a street value of estimated $154 million. Well, I'm looking at this thing, and what they didn't realize until about 2 or 3 weeks into affecting the arrests and the operation continuing going on, that nearly 400,000 pounds was only a week's work.
Yeah, no shit.
And they're like, they're like going like this, but time goes on or whatever like this, but it was really fortuitous in the way in which it happened. And it happened, what the U.S. government did, they did by design rather than by accident. And that was in 1987, in September 1st, 1987, the United States government changed their federal sentencing guidelines to mandatory minimum sentences across the board. It didn't make any difference what you were busted with. It was a mandatory. They had no more discretion. The magistrates of this country, all the discretionary measures were taken away from them when these new guidelines came into effect. And when I say that, I mean whereby they used to be able to take into account that, okay, you're a family man, you've never been in trouble, you've got 5 kids, you've always worked hard, you don't have a criminal record. They could take certain things into consideration while determining your sentence. When it came to mandatory minimums, it took discretionary measures away from the magistrates, and now it became a slide rule. Okay, this is what you get, and the judge has no say in whatsoever. Jeez. Plus, they did away with parole. After the first year in prison, you only got 57 days a year good time, where before you would get good time calculated, and then after your first day, you could earn as much as 3 days off a month. Your second year, and then after your second year, you could get 3 days a month, and your time starts to shrink in that way. Well, they got rid of all of that. And now the mandatory minimums, what that meant was, by mandatory, if you got caught doing what we were doing, one indictment has 4 counts: conspiracy import, conspiracy with intent to sell, and conspiracy to import more than 2,000 kilograms. Each of those counts was worth $1 million. Each of those counts was worth 10 years mandatory to life. So one indictment meant you're looking at 40 years mandatory to life and $4 million in fines. And this is what they were giving everybody at that time. And me, I had 4 indictments, which quadrupled all of that, which made 160 years mandatory to life and $16 million in fines, because I was what they determined as being managerial.
Yeah.
Go figure, right?
Yep.
So yeah, so long story short, again, to not get to, to dwell too much on, and I'm not giving anything away that you won't find in the book. I mean, there's too much, and a lot of what you're hearing isn't even in the book. But they had, given these younger kids, because they found out now that the arrests that they are affecting, this year, were vastly different than what they had been used to the prior years, because now they're getting kids. They're getting young men and young women. They're not getting any adults. If they are, they're getting very few, because those guys have already done their time and gone to prison and probably got home and said, we're done. So what it turns out to be was that now that they're getting these younger kids, and the original guy that was in Colombia they picked up, and he wound up recruiting 2 younger guys and said that, look, they know about you dudes. They changed the whole program. This is life sentences we're talking about now. This is your old man getting out of prison shit we're talking about now. They're seriously changed the way things are operating. When the year prior, if you got busted on a boatload of this shit, you would maybe get 12 months, 14 months or whatever. And then you go home. Now you get busted on that shit, you're looking at life sentences. That's how drastically the door had swung. Well, what wound up happening was that they realized now they're getting mostly kids and young adults, and they were giving them the opportunity to cooperate. Tell us what you've been up to. Tell us who you're working with, all this kind of stuff, because cooperation under those guidelines, the only way that you could be sentenced below that mandatory minimum sentencing. The judges could give you now probation if they chose to, if they deemed that the information you were giving them, or cooperation rather, was substantial enough. So now we're talking about, there was 38 of us the first day. Now they're getting, up into the 100 range of people, and mostly kids, because the dads and everybody already doing their thing, right? Yeah. And what the government wasn't willing to do, and it turns out that some of the guys that were ahead of these operations, the head of customs, head of United States Treasury, Treasury agents, I had Secret Service and CIA, ex-CIA, that came to run drug interdiction vessels that are now friends of mine that were involved in these operations. And it's kind of creepy to say that, but we're only friends in the way of because of the way we worked. We weren't violent. I have one of my dearest friends, John Deasy, was the United States Customs supervisor who did a Viceland video documentary with me. Just the coolest, and we're just the dearest friends. And he was I forget how many tours in Nam he did. He wound up being a colonel in the Army Rangers, Special Forces, a badass. He'd probably kill you with his pinky finger, Had him out here chasing me. And we finally met years ago, rather coincidentally in an LA Fitness where we were both working out, wound up becoming dear friends, and him telling me all the while what a waste of fucking time it was for them. Because they weren't making any difference whatsoever. Because and I told him about a night I ran a boat that was chasing us aground, an interdiction vessel. I purposely ran it aground because I knew the boat. And the only reason the government was able to interdict the way they did was they didn't have the budget, the war chest that we did. They were confiscating Go Fast and vessels from us and using them to chase us with. Oh. But what these brain surgeons weren't thinking about was, who built that boat? Well, right. I helped design and build that boat. So all we had to do is build one a little more badass than the one you took from us, and just leave you sitting like you're tied to a pole. It's just that simple. And I'm thinking, you guys are Secret Service and customs and you can't, CIA, and you can't figure that out. I mean, come on, man. And I ran this boat literally aground on a sandbar one night. They called it the Blue Thunder. And John, I'm telling him the story, and John, he looks at me, he goes, I was on that boat.
No.
Right. But I'll send you the picture of the front page of that Naples Daily News, and that gentleman, John DC, is his picture is on that front page. He's the only customs agent that's shown on the front page of that newspaper that day I was arrested.
Hell
Only
yeah.
5 names were named, and I was one of the 5. I was the second name named after my Cuban buddy. But yeah, I mean that judge was, the prosecutor. They wanted cooperation from me. And I said, you know what? Just shoot me, shoot my brothers, my cousins, my dad, my mom, my nephews, and the dog, the cat, because that's what you're asking. Even though all the years that we were doing this never involved gunplay. And like I said, the only time I ever saw a gun was the first time I went to Colombia
Yeah.
and held a gun. Or I only did it because I went out the door and everybody else was carrying one. So I took one with me. Not that I was ever going to use it because I never had I always had an aversion to guns. I never fucked with guns.
Right.
But you start telling these guys this, and I was when it came to me in cooperation and not being able to do that, and I was put in this small room. It was being taken out and questioned, about a couple times a week, sometimes 3 times a week, out of my federal holding cell here in Fort Myers County Jail. They kept me there for nearly 10 months. And they started taking me out, and they put me in a room, and a man and a woman with brown identical vested suits came in and put their little gold badges up against this window that I was standing behind with the thing that you talk into like this.
Mm-hmm.
And they were United States Treasury agents. And I went, oh shit, just like that, And the United States prosecutor, Susan Daltuga, was in the next room, and she heard me say that. She comes busting through the door, and she goes, no, Timmy, this is not what you think it is. And I said, well, Susan, why don't you tell me what, I think this is, or tell me what it is. And if it's about cooperation, you can just open that door right there and take me back to my home, to my cell, and put me back in my cell, because that's not happening. And you know why? She says, no. She says, they're here because what we'd like to know is how you were able to get away with this for over a decade and we couldn't catch you. And I got a big smile and I said, well, game over, man. I can tell you that. I'll tell you how stupid you people are. And I just wound up basically asking the first several questions. I asked these 2 Treasury agents. I said, first of all, do you understand the geography of Everglades City? And they looked at me and said, yeah. And I asked them point blank, I said, how many roads into Everglades City and out of Everglades City are there? There's one, Highway 29. There's only one way to get in there and one way to get out. And I said, from Everglades City to Miami, how many direct routes are there? Well, there's only one. I said, well, yeah, one. That's US 41. And then I said, how do you think we got all those millions of pounds of weed to Miami? They didn't go over there on the backs of fucking pelicans and porpoises, man. They went down that one road, in and out. And 99 times out of 100, we're waving at you as we're going by. That's just how it was. So I start telling them about the sheer amounts, the volumes, and the amounts of stuff that we're moving, and the money being made. We had a money house, Carlito Leo and I, where I would come to get paid. And the house at any one time had as much as $200-300 million in cash in it.
Holy shit.
And these are from the loads that are being sold and that we're being paid out of. Mm-hmm. And I would be called every now and then when it was time to go get paid, and and sit there and literally with 6-7 money machines and count money endlessly for a day, for 2 days or 3 days. And then the amounts and the jobs started backing up. Like I said, they did earlier. We do one job, and then before we get paid, we've done 2 or 3 more in the meantime. Mm-hmm. Now all the money's coming in, and I could be sitting there for days counting money when I should be in Colombia. I should be unloading boats. I should be doing this and that, and we're busy counting it. That's when we decided to start weighing it. And I've had a lot of controversy over this, and I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot of all the, brain surgeons and everybody that has it figured out there. But we knew that every single bill, no matter what denomination, weighed a gram. Uh-huh. And there's 28 of those in an ounce. There's 16 of those in a pound. And it's just math from that point on.
Damn,
So we weigh it out, and what we discovered was, you know, and a lot of people knew this at this time. We didn't invent it. You know, George Young, became one of my dearest friends, you know, before he died. Him and Diego, they weighed their money as well. In the movie Blow, if you've seen the movie Blow.
Yeah.
His partner, George's partner in that movie, his name wasn't Diego. It was actually Carlos Slater, is who that was. They had to change his name because he's in witness protection.
Oh, okay.
But to weigh the money, now I'm getting out of there. I'm weighing 25, 30, 40 million dollars at a time, and it's only taken me an afternoon to do it because we're weighing it in launder baskets on giant scales. You know, 22.2 pounds of 100s is $1 million. 110 pounds of 20s is $1 million. 220 pounds of 10s is $1 million, and so on and so on. So we were literally weighing tons of money. Money is fucking heavy, dude. And if I'm getting 25 million, $30 million, that shit weighs. I mean, it weighs. It's heavy. Like I just told you, you know, $1 million in 20s is 110 pounds.
Yeah, that is fucking heavy.
And that's only $1 million. And I got 25, 30 more to go, you know, so we're talking literally thousands of pounds of money. And a lot of times it would take me more to get the money home, more days to get the money back home than it took to get their freaking pot to them.
So the money was a pain.
It was a pain in the butt. It literally was, but it afforded us the lifestyle as kids to be able to do these crazy things that we wound up doing.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, ultimately, like I said, when the shit hit the fan and everybody started running and taking off, and you know, the investigations followed up behind, and I wound up getting, you know, standing in front of the magistrate, getting what my just dues. You know, what they were having trouble with, the government at that time, was quite simply this. Prior to that, the year or two prior to that, you know, changing of the guidelines and the way people were being sentenced, the five Daniels brothers, there was Dwayne, there was Craig, Dwayne, Randall, Cheryl, and
Daryl.
Daryl. And they're standing in front of the federal magistrate being sentenced, you know, for what it is they, you know, got popped for. Well, the judge is reading off their list of seizures prior to their, you know, handing down the sentencing. He's reading off a list of companies that belong to a Netherlands Antilles holding company worth about $8 million in cash and numerous properties throughout the Caribbean. Here in the United States, they had houses, they had cars, they had hotels, they had timeshares, they had motels, they had buses, cars, airplanes. Now, Daryl had two planes. Didn't have a pilot's license. He just had the money to buy the plane and the money to have the guy show him how to fly the damn thing, right? And just toys like that. Plus, you know, they had numerous properties, like I said, and nearly $12 million in cash in the United States. Plus, they seized 580,000 pounds of weed.
Holy shit.
Now, who in the hell has 500,000 plus pounds of shit laying around, man? You know,
I guess they did.
People like we do, you know. Well, here's the judge going through all this stuff, and he's like, you know, he's just, you know, I mean, I'm reading the transcripts and I'm hearing the same thing from Craig as I'm interviewing the youngest brother while I'm writing this book. Mm-hmm. And he says that the magistrate simply, you know, quite simply took his glasses off and threw them down on his desk and looked at all of us, and he says, I have absolutely no idea how to sentence people like you. He says, in all my years as a magistrate, I've never come across anybody quite like you. He says, you know, because there weren't any guidelines that fit the crime. He had to make something up. Yeah. So being as lost as he was, the first four brothers, this is Craig's second time, the youngest of the five brothers, and he was my dearest friend even today.
Right.
And the judge made him aware, and he made him, made him aware that this is your second time now, remember? And he's like, yes, sir, I remember. Well, his four brothers had never been busted before. The judge gave him 36 months. 2.5 years, man. I mean, what the fuck? These guys
That is
flooded
nothing.
North America with weed, and all the judge could figure out to give him was 36 months.
That's
It was
it.
almost comical. When he gets to Craig, and he's like, Craig, he says, Mr. Daniels, he says, and I remember this is your second time around. And just, Craig is like, real humble. He was like, yes, sir. Yes, I remember. Yes, sir. And the judge is, scratching his head again. And he looks up, he takes his glasses down. He looks at Craig right dead in the eye. And he says, like I said, sir, he says, once again, I have never in my life come across anybody quite like you. Does 5 years sound like a long time to you? He's looking him in the eye. He's asking him, does 5 years sound like a long time to you, Mr. Daniels? And Craig goes, oh, yes, sir. That sounds like a hell of a long time. 5 years, the guy gave him. He's out in 3. You know what I mean? It's just
Holy
that's the way
shit.
it was.
Yeah.
So that being said, here we are these next year or so later, and they're handing out these life sentences for the very same thing. What they weren't willing to do was to allow the children now to get life sentences when a year and a half ago, the grandfathers and the fathers and the adults and uncles and older cousins, everybody are getting basically a slap on the wrist and getting 12 months, 14 months, 16 months. And they're getting sent to these Air Force bases where they have camps where they paint a line on the ground and they say, don't cross that line. This is the kind of prison that they're putting these people in and working on Air Force bases and shit.
Right.
So when it came to us and they had changed these guidelines, they allowed us to, the people that were getting these 40-year sentences handed to them, they were giving the opportunity to cooperate. And by cooperation, like I said, they just wanted to know, give us some names of the people that you're working with. Tell us what your job was and tell us what you know. And, with that cooperation, now you can be sentenced below those mandatory minimums and, you'll still be able to have a life to look forward to. Right. Well, what wound up happening, and this is the design part that came from the government, was that they knew there was just so many people. I mean, there was over 270 people ultimately that wound up going down in Southwest Florida over this, and even more. Some of them skipped, some of them did, managed to go off into the obscurity. But for the most part, there were hundreds of people that wound up going down for this. Mm-hmm. And so what the government decided to do was, giving this plea deal, okay, you agree to plead with us. You agree to give us cooperation, and we'll be now we can sentence you to whatever we want to sentence you to. So what was happening was they were giving this plea deal, this agreement, to everybody. The guys that had already gotten the deal were saying, "Look, Teddy and Jimmy and Willie, they're saying your names, boys. They're coming after you, man. There's no doubt about it. Game's over." But they're going to offer you a deal to cooperate with them. So I suggested, or everybody suggested, you cooperate, because now you can tell on Teddy and Tommy and Jeff, they have an immunity in the prosecution deal that they made. So even though you say that.
Oh, well, you're still there.
So everybody was telling on everybody else, but because of the immunity thing that they were all given, they weren't hurting each other.
Right.
It was a beautiful thing. And that was what the government had designed, because they didn't deem it, that it was necessarily fair that we were getting life sentences in the year before. Their grandpas and dads and uncles are getting 12 months.
Yeah.
and shit like that. But when it came to a guy like me, they wanted to know, okay, who's in Miami and where are you flying to every corner of the Caribbean to? Well, I'm sorry, man, but I can't tell you that, for the simple reason that, if I even though what we did through all these years was never violent in any way or any stretch of the imagination, it was more fun than it was anything else. The only time I ever feared for my life, and honest to God, was from the United States government when they put guns against my head when they arrested me. That was the only time I ever got scared of a gun.
Yeah.
So what they wound up doing was offering this deal to cooperation for everybody. So everybody was telling on everybody else and getting this deal. They come to me and I'm like, I can't tell you, I can't help you. So that's when they brought me in that one day, and that's when I went, oh shit, like this. And then that's when the Susan Deltuva jumped in and said, Timmy, this is not about cooperation. They said, I wanted to know how you did this for all these years and we couldn't catch you. And that's when I started telling them. And they would bring me in, a couple times a week, take me out of my cell in the jail, you know, handcuff me, chain me to a belly chain, shackle my ankles and run a chain from my belly chain to my shackles around my ankles, and take me out of the building and around the corner into the federal building on the streets outside. I'm doing the convict shuffle with these chains and shit like this, good morning, saying good morning to everybody on the sidewalk.
Oh,
And then
wow.
take me into this room and start questioning me. And I'm telling you about the sheer volume of material that's being moved, the sheer amounts of money that's being made and lost and just pissed away. That um, that goes on for about 2 months or so, and then one day I'm taken out, and I'm go right past the room in which I had been previously going into, and they put me in another room that was much smaller with one guy sitting in there at a table with a polygraph machine. And they were hooking me up because they weren't believing what I was telling them, about the boatloads and the fucking money, I mean, and just how stupid you were and where all this shit, how easy it appeared to be.
Right.
Well, when I walked out of that room, I was almost giggling, and I turned around, and all those detectives in the room were like scratching their head, going, "God damn, he's telling the truth."
He's telling the truth, man.
Yeah, so that's pretty much how it wound up with me. And then I go to sentencing, and I'm standing in front of the magistrate. Now, the deal that I had made through the attorney that had ultimately cost me $1.2 million. He was out of Baltimore. He was the father-in-law of my local attorney because this was too high profile for him. He said, we got to get you my father-in-law. He's this big-time criminal attorney out of Baltimore. And I said, get him down here. I don't care what he costs. Get him down here. And he did me good. He wound up getting ultimately my sentence capped at 20 years, meaning they couldn't give me more than 20 years. But they also couldn't give me any years below 10. They couldn't give me below the mandatory minimum because they didn't deem the information I was giving them substantial enough. They wanted to know who I'm dealing with around the
Right.
Caribbean, and taking this whole thing another bit further, and that just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So when it came down to it, and ultimately my sentencing date came up, the judge was rather appreciative and humbled, in a manner of speaking, by way of letting me know how she appreciated the invaluable information and insight into my world that they were given, that they knew nothing about. I mean, there was shit going on, and dealings and money being made, and shit coming into this country. And I was lucky to get ultimately she sentenced me to 10 years. She gave me what she could give me. She couldn't give me less than that, so she didn't give me any more than that. She didn't give me any more than 10. She could have anywhere between that and 20, but she gave me the 10
Yeah.
because she valued the information that I had given her, that these people had no clue how any of this worked,
Damn.
up until that point.
You laid it
And,
out.
what she said to me was that, I'm going to, Mr. McBride, sentence you to federal correctional facility in Tallahassee, where um, through the Bureau of Prisons, Tallahassee is the hub of the educational system within the Bureau of Prisons. If you are a federal prisoner anywhere in the United States or anywhere in North America, and you want an education, a proper college degree, or whatever the case may be, whatever type of study you want, that's where they transfer you to, because they have a campus on the compound. They have civilian professors and teachers and what have you come into the buildings and teach these people, college level courses, if you choose. And within the building, there's also a regular library, and there's what they call a law library. And every federal institution, even state institution in the United States, has to, by law, give their prisoners access to legal materials with which to work on their own cases if they should choose to, and gain a little more information and insight as to how they got there.
Yeah.
And if the judicial system didn't just run them over and get them there, out of the way it should proceed. So about 3 weeks into being at Tallahassee, I wound up meeting a guy out on the weight yard, Rolando. You met him in the book.
Yep.
He turned me on to Dennis Lehman was the guy's name. He was running a law library, and he was a bank robber, and he was something else, man.
Yeah.
The guy was just the greatest guy in the world, man. It's just a wonderful person, And there are relationships that can be forged in only in an environment such as that.
Yeah.
You get to there's a bit more of an attachment, if you will, when it comes to a relationship and a friendship, a meeting under those types of circumstances. Well, Dennis liked me immediately, and I wanted a job. My job was construction. They pointed me construction. I said, Dennis, I don't want to build this damn prison, man. It said, get me out of here, get me a job. And there was an opening in the legal library, and I took it. I was, applied for it. They changed my job assignment, and now I'm working down in the law library, and now I'm having to learn the craft, because the inmates are coming up and they're wanting certain books to look up certain case law and stuff like that, because the judicial system or jurisprudence in the United States is done on what's called a precedence. Everything is adjudicated due to precedence, which means that we have cases that parallel in similar ways. You cannot be adjudicated differently than me. We have to be adjudicated equally.
Okay.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So whenever there's a new case that's adjudicated within the federal system, it's added to these books, and you've seen them movies of lawyers' offices with all these books that look alike.
Yeah.
Those are the United States annotated code books. And when those new laws are brought into and new precedent law is set, my job started out being adding these annotations to these different books, because law in the United States is precedent. And when you can go through and do what's called shepherdizing and learning how to find the way you were adjudicated and bring up certain points that were argued from another case that parallel yours, that say that, okay, this person got less time for the similar things that you've done. You can't get more time than him. So you need to go back and be resentenced in court properly. And that's how that system worked.
Oh.
Well, I cited 15 cases. I wrote my own brief for reduction of sentence based on their definition of cooperation. And I found that simply one day screwing around back in the library. I'm flipping through what's called the Black's Legal Dictionary, and I'm just dicking around, and I come across their definition of cooperation. And it basically says that, if you ask me for something and I give it to you, I have essentially, under that definition, I've cooperated with you. Yeah. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, well, Jesus, they wanted to know how all this shit was done. I told them about it. They wanted to know, how the money was distributed and how people were paid off and all that kind of shit. And I told them about that. I told them everything they wanted to know. Essentially, I cooperated with them. So I wrote my own brief for reduction of sentence and had it submitted to the middle district courts in Florida, and had it set before my sentencing judge, who had to review it. She's the only one that could review my sentence and change it if it were warranted. And I sent that in, and when it came time, the date for me to appear in court for her to read her decision made, I didn't go. I didn't want to give up a bunk it took me 3.5 years to get, from the middle of the room to a window next, people got to die, and they're, 30-year-old sentences are over and people can leave and shit like that, because I was in a medium security, one level below maximum, because I was considered an escape risk. There were 2 sets of fences. There was razor wire. There were killing fields. There were towers and gun towers. There were 2 pickup trucks with dogs and 2 guys with rifles 24/7, 365 days a year, circling this damn compound in this prison. You weren't going nowhere, man, for sure. So, I went through all of that. I sent my brother that day to go, attend the court hearing and see what happened, So I waited for almost 4 hours in the phone line to call my brother that night. When he picked the phone up, and all I could ask him all right away was like, dude, what happened? What'd you give me? I'm like freaking out. And the first thing he says to me, he says, "Were you doing that, prosecutor?" I said, "No." He said, "Because she was talking pretty good about you, man. Because her and I were the ones having these talks about how it was working and how it was done and all this kind of stuff. And we got to be, we had a bit of a rapport going on,
Yeah.
even though she was who she was and I was who I was. Um, my ability to articulate and speak and my level of intelligence was such where we could understand one another to a
Yeah.
degree. And I told him, I said, "Look, stop screwing around, brother. Just tell me, what the fuck did she give me?" He said, "She gave you 4 years. She cut your sentence from 10 to 4." And I said, "Come on, man, please don't screw with me." She says, "No, seriously, you got 4 years." Well, I'm 3.5 years in now, which means I'm 6 months from going home now. And I
Yeah.
start screaming. I almost pulled the phone out of the wall, and I got 40 convicts back here waiting to get on the phone. Would have killed me if I'd have done that, And I just, I'm just hollering and screaming. I'm rolling around on the floor, dude. I'm 6 months short from going home now.
Oh
And
man, that had to have been
and
the best feeling in the world.
I wound up, just going through the paces and doing what I needed to do to get my ass out of there because nobody else was going to do it.
No, and you did it
So
yourself, man. So that's good that they give people opportunities to go in there and do that kind of shit.
yeah,
And you
you
made
know
it
what?
out.
And people always talk about, there's always the question of rehabilitation. Well, in my estimation, rehabilitation is a made up word. It's a word that doesn't describe anything other than what you achieve under your own volition. Um, Rehabilitation is only there if you choose it.
Hmm.
They give you the means by which to do so. They offer you the tools to do this. They offer you education. They offer you, job skills and things like this. And it's up to you to take advantage of those things. And if you don't, rehabilitation doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I've seen it, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen it as a revolving door. Guys are coming back in, like old homeboy week. Hey, dude, how you doing, man? I haven't seen you in 6 months.
Mm.
Welcome back.
That's horrible.
What the
Yeah.
fuck? You know,
That's not cool.
anybody with a reasonable amount of intelligence spends one day in jail. That should be all you need right there,
That's
man.
it.
I mean,
Fuck that. Never want to go back.
seriously.
Yeah.
I had nightmares for 2 years after I got out. I went through institutionalization, they call it. I was only there for 4 years, and I got a huge taste of it. And I wrote, the story of George. You
Yeah.
know, he was, and I still to this day wrestle with myself as to whether or not he did what he did on purpose or it just was done by accident. But
Yeah.
and forgive me and forgive your followers for us talking out of context this way and on just something in which only you and I are privy to, or who has read the book is privy to. But I
Yeah.
urge you to read the book and hear a lot of the stuff that's being skipped over. A lot of the relevant information. I mean, like I said, there was a lot of joviality going on, a lot of screwing around, a lot of fun was being had because we were kids. Making incredible sums of money and not really appreciating the fact. And now having gone through what we're gone through and wind up, getting the shit scared out of us and our lives taken away from us to ultimately be able, to have a guy like myself being in the position I was in, the incredible sequence of events that needed to take place in order for me to be sitting here having this conversation with you, man.
I know. I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity, man. I really have enjoyed your story. I mean, 2.5 hour interview. I knew it was going to be long. You know what I mean? But
Wow, I didn't even realize, man. Yeah, 2 hours 31 minutes, dude.
yeah, man.
That's
I
why it
mean,
goes fast for me because I'm just getting started, man.
yeah,
There's a lot more to go, and I would love to be invited back just to to tell a little bit more of the craziness. Some of
yeah,
the jobs that we've done and the ways I've seen this stuff packaged, the way I've seen it moved through the Caribbean. I mean, just some of the craziest stuff you'll ever hear in your life. And you'll only hear it from me.
right.
Because what I represent with regards to this story and all the people involved were is simply that this represents the beginning and the ending of Caribbean marijuana coming into this country,
Hmm.
literally. the first pot hauler to ever bring a load of weed for the Colombians or the Cubans in Cuba to Miami is a local legend. His name was Lauren Toch Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and his story was written about him by some clever writers and very prestigious writers from the University of Miami.
Yeah.
He was the first one to go out to Panama with his crew and around the corner and up the rivers and the grasslands in Colombia to find the Colombian red. Learned how to figure it out, made deals, package it, process it. I mean, it was trial and error, and it was not an easy thing to do.
Right.
He was one of the originals. He was, you know, he was the first generation, and out of that first generation propagated my friends' fathers and uncles, the Daniels, and out of them came the kids that I grew up with. That's how we became third generation. And this is the story that talks about how a small town was able to integrate smuggling into their way of life. It's spanning 30 years and three generations.
Damn. No, I mean, I really, from hearing how you talk and, how professional you are about everything, I understand now why your book was chosen out of, what did he say, 20, 30,000 people?
25, 30,000. Yeah.
I understand it, man. I really do, because the way you carry yourself and you tell these stories and how you have no problem of, discussing everything. I mean, it's just, I can understand it, man. I see it,
You
you
know,
know?
it was discussed, and I did all this, I did this very respectfully, and I did it respectfully in a way by which um, I didn't name any names that were never mentioned, because I couldn't by law, because the book has to go through a bit of, legal
Right.
process. I could not mention somebody or implicate someone who had not ever been implicated.
Yeah.
So when I mention a name, there are some names that are the real names, and there are some names that are morphs of the name of the real names,
Right.
like Captain Red.
Hmm.
Uh, Billy ultimately says, "I don't care if you say my name. Tell him my name. I don't care." But at that time, I wasn't able to reach him and get through an email of written permission to use his name,
Right.
because he was never implicated. He faded off. He managed to wind up getting out after one of the first operations and fading off into the distance and stepped back into the shadows, and he just kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
And 2 years is a statute of limitations on something like this, and after 2 years, he was free and clear.
So now it don't
But
matter.
there are other names like Clark, my best
Mhm.
friend, my buddy on the boat. I could have very well said his name because he was part of the operation. He was
Yeah.
implicated and went to prison like everybody else did. But out of sheer respect for him, I wasn't able to contact him and ask him, could I use your real name? You
Hmm.
know, and not being able to do that, I changed Mark to Clark.
Yeah.
And things like that.
Just something simple. So
Yeah,
where
just
can the
something
people?
simpler, whereby if somebody that knows the story that we grew up with would read this, they know who they were.
Yeah,
They know
just
who
by
I'm
hearing
talking. They
it.
know who I'm talking about. And things like that.
Or
And
I was gonna say, where can the people find your book and where your social medias?
my book is being sold wildly. It's in its second printing, its second edition rather,
Okay.
on Amazon. If you go on to Amazon and you type in Saltwater Cowboy book, you'll find a picture of this right here. This good looking guy right here. And it's titled, of course, Saltwater Cowboy: The
Oh
Rise
yeah.
and Fall of a Marijuana Empire.
Yeah.
And this is actually one of a very rare hardcover version of my book.
Oh, they're
I have 5 of these that have never been opened, and that are in perfect condition. I've seen my book sold used on Amazon for as much as $254, this first
oh
edition, because
shit.
they're
Damn.
rare, they're hard to come by, they're just not printed anymore because first editions are only so many are printed.
You're
That's
right.
the reason for first editions, right?
Yeah.
to,
You're
to
right.
make them collectible. And this book and the demand for the book was such that they're selling, they're reselling my books out of libraries. Every library in North America at one time had this book. And
Damn.
libraries change over books and content because they can only be used so many times before they start getting, a point where they're not going to be worthy of anything. You could find a used library book that may have a stamp or something on it like that, for, and maybe some dog ears or some, some things done, mucked up on the covers and such like that. But you can find them, if you look hard enough for, $40, $50, $60. But the second edition printing, and I was called about 7 months ago for my editor from St. Martin's Press. His name is Mark Resnick. He unfortunately wasn't able to help me with the entire book because he was just finishing up a book called American Sniper at the time I began this. So
Oh,
when he finished working with American Sniper and Kevin Kyle's story, he jumped in and helped work with the second half of the book. There were
damn.
only three edits done in this entire book. Only three.
Holy
And that was
shit.
and that my literary agent just went, wow. And that sort of thing. But if you can't, or you can, get a first edition copy, that's cool.
Right.
But they're expensive and they're rare, like I said. But the second edition is everything the hardcover is, except it's got a paper
That's
cover.
Yep.
And it's $21.95.
Yeah. Hey, it's on Audible too if they want to listen to the
There's
book.
an Audible version that's done by a very cool guy by the name of Wes Talbot, who, when I approached him, I put my hat in the ring to be the voice for my own book, but pre-production had already begun, so I didn't have time to be that. They'd already selected the voice, and I was asked to go ahead and contact him if I wanted to, and my agent said, I just called the guy, So I called him out of the blue, and I said, is this Wes Talbot? And he goes like, yeah. And I go, this is well, this is Tim. This is your next project, Saltwater Cowboy. And he's like, dude, I've been trying to find what you sounded like on, YouTube or any kind of shit like that, because I wanted to hear your voice. And I said, well, you know what? Coincidentally, that's the reason for my call, because if you'd have picked up the phone and said, hi, my name's Wes Talbot, I'd have hung that bitch up, called my agent and said, this is not the guy,
No, hell no.
But it turned out this was his 32nd book that,
Oh, wow.
reading for Audible. And prior to my book, he had done Stephen King's work.
Oh, okay, damn.
So he has a very cool voice.
Yeah.
That I'm a bit partial to because it's my baby, and it's missing, in my opinion. If you've not heard my voice and you're not familiar with what I sound like, the book is going to read fantastically, no matter how you do it. But once you hear me and you read the book, now you hear my voice come through the pages because I wrote every single freaking word you read. This gentleman down here, right here, Ralph Barrier, was came on to help me, guide me through the publishing process. I did the writing and passed it on to him to say, hey, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. I guess just bounce it off of him. But his job was to help me put it in book fashion. Because when you write a book and you submit it to the publisher, it has to be in book fashion. It has to be ready to go to copy edit, copy print.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Paged, paragraphed, the whole 9 yards and how it's all set up. I wasn't familiar with how that was done. I can write like a bitch, but I can't, I didn't know the professional aspect of it, because publishers don't just take your manuscript and then do all that for you. You hand them a finished product. And that's what I wound up giving them. And that's, it wound up being their in-house number one read.
Damn.
And the story was such a likable story, in that the author of George Young's story, Blow,
Okay. Yeah.
Bruce Porter, he heard about the stories that people were talking about St. Martin's Press, because he's also a St. Martin's Press author. He was the reason why Mark Resnick had championed my book to the publisher, Susan Robinson, because they were familiar with this. They had familiarity with this genre, so they thought that, since they did Blow, we got to get this one, for sure. So when Bruce found out about the book, and they were giving out at that time advanced readers copies, is what they call. They send them out to celebrities and newspapers and magazines, in the hopes to get reviews back.
Right.
And that would give them some kind of idea of how the book's gonna sell. Well, Bruce couldn't wait to get a copy of the book. He read it, and he said, my mind went like that. And he says, I got to write this guy a review. I got to offer him a review. And he writes this. If you can read that.
I can't. It's kind of blurry.
Yeah,
It might be best if you read it because I can't really see.
Well, yeah, let me do this. It says, wild and entertaining true story by one of the biggest pot haulers in American history. Speedboat chases, women, Colombian mansions. Tim McBride's tale of excess is a thrill to read.
Hell yeah.
Bruce Porter, New York Times bestselling author of Blow.
Son of a bitch, man.
And I thought, how cool is that, man? So, the second edition comes out, it's selling widely. I've got fans in Finland. I got fans in Bali, Indonesia, in the Philippines. I got 12 million fans in Australia, 4 million in New Zealand, 3 million in the Philippines. In the UK, I don't know how many people. They're selling my book on Google in Spain, Italy, Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands. I mean, it's selling wildly and crazily everywhere.
Damn,
I was blessed enough to have my book was given to a gentleman and who is an icon in the cannabis industry. And he was one of a duo of gentlemen who are considered icons and original activists in the cannabis industry. Read my book and send it back to me, signed by him, saying, "Great read, Tommy Chong."
I knew it. I was gonna say I fucking knew it. I was just waiting, bro. I knew it. I was like, damn, dude.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, how cool is that, man? This guy dug my shit, man. He read my book, and that kind of shit,
That's fucking awesome, bro.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, man. You coming on my show and chopping it up for almost 3 hours, bro. I really appreciate it.
Not at all, man. I just, this is what I do, and I dig the shit out. Like I said, that seemed like a half hour to me, man. Because once I get into there, it's like having written this book. It just comes right from here and comes right to you, man. There's I'm not reading off of any cards or votes or any kind of shit like that. Every time I do a show like this, the stories are similar, but you're going to get something different every time. So,
well, we'll have to
that's
do
what I
one
say. If you want to hear some more, just, dude, I'd be happy to come back. And I dig guys like yourself, man.
Well, thank you,
in
man.
particular, you're very good at what you do. You made my job easy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
And also, I can be found at Original Saltwater Cowboy on Instagram. I'd love for you to just jump in and follow. There's some, I post some crazy stuff about what's going on and what I got going on, and got working out and have been for several months now. Brand of cannabis, Saltwater Cowboy brand of cannabis out of Oklahoma. I'm working on a brand of Saltwater Cowboy cannabis products out of California, out of LA actually, and we've got I'm in some talks with some people on a television series. So jump on Instagram at Original Saltwater Cowboy. I'm Tim McBride, Saltwater Cowboy on Facebook. You can find me there. Follow me there, and everything that I'm into and I'm about to get into, and just some other crazy shit that I wind up posting is all there, man. So jump on board. Come on, let's all take a ride, man.
Well, thank you, man.
But buy the book. Go to Amazon, and if it's just to push the button to get a download, please, I urge you, because you'll never hear this story by anyone but me.
Let's really think about this. There had to have been so many drugs that were getting smuggled into the United States back in the day. Tim was just one of many guys running an operation like this. Tim's got a very insane life story, as you heard today. He could have spent a big amount of time of his life in prison and not been able to tell his life story. But he's able to tell his story, and he was able to write a whole book about it and go on a bunch of other podcasts, including mine, and tell his life story. The name of his book is Saltwater Cowboy. That can be found in the video description below. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to get more interviews like this. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Also, a playlist will pop up of all my other interviews that I've done in the past. If you like my interviews, please go check out my other podcast called A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. I co-host that with ex-Colombo mobster Salvatore Polisi. We cover his life story in the Mafia. Thank you again for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one.